Good morning, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our third Thursday workshop. Today is National Pawpaw Day. I would just, my name is Edwin Chavous, and before we get started, I just have a few announcements. First, I'd like to let everyone know that you are each and every one is cordially invited to our Kentucky Limited Resource Minority Farms Conference. That's going to be the week before Thanksgiving. Now, this year we're going to do something a little different. We're going to start it on a Thursday, and it's going to be Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. You're all cordially invited to attend. Next Wednesday, and it's on the screen, and if you need any assistance, Ms. Morgan Wimley out at the registration table, or myself or any other KSU on the media team will be glad to assist you to register. Next, we will have our KSU fourth Wednesday beef cattle meeting at the Lexington Stockyard, starting at 6 p.m. You're all cordially invited to attend that workshop. That's next Wednesday, the fourth Wednesday beef cattle workshop. Now, I'm going to invite Ms. Joni Nelson to come up and give some announcements.
Thank you, Edwin. I'll stand on my toes so you can hear me, and I don't have to move the mic. My name is Joni Nelson, and I manage the Small Scale Farm Grant here at Kentucky State University. How many of you have heard of it or used the Small Scale Farm Grant before? Woohoo! Got a few in the audience. Well, if you haven't, the next deadline is October 1st, so go ahead and get your application in. We have several different categories that you can apply for. One of the main things we do for pawpaws and for fruits and vegetables is we do washing stations, vegetable washing stations, cold storage, things like that. So if you need a cool bot or anything like that, you can get up to $5,000 through this grant program. It's a great program. We also offer an education grant, which is up to $500. So if you want to go to some of the workshops coming up, I know there's Women in Ag coming up. There's the Organic Associations of Kentucky's annual conference coming up. There's our conference coming up. There's a lot of different workshops that you want to go to. You can get up to $500, and you don't actually have to be farming to get that $500, but you do have to be producing a product to get the $5,000. And there's, like I said, there's several different categories you can fit in. If you have any questions, please come see me. I'll be around most of the day. We have some brochures, some information about the Small Farm Grant with us as well. And I also wanted to introduce Lindsay Crumley. Where did she go? She's around here somewhere. Oh, here she is. Hi. Lindsay is with the Food Assistance Program with KDA, where they can help buy local food. So if any of you are selling fruits, vegetables, meats, things like that, they have a program here in Kentucky to help purchase some of those products from you. Do you want to say something real quick?
Yeah, so as she said, I'm Lindsay Crumby, and I work with KDA, and this is the Local Food Purchase Assistance Grant, so LFPA. And what we are able to do is purchase Kentucky producers' foods or food products that are anywhere from unprocessed to significantly processed. And we've got a little over $11 million to do this work through 2025. And so we are looking for producers who are interested in entering new markets or potentially increasing your scale. And we are able to purchase these for your number one products or your grade A's, whatever the equivalent is, and we're buying them at their retail market value that you would sell to your stores or at your farmer's market. And then we turn around and take all of these quality products and we feed the state freely. So anyone who is in need of food is entitled to our purchases, and so we do those through food boxes. frozen meals programming, and we supplement some of our food bank and pantry distributions across the state.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Edwin Chavous now. And if you have any questions about the small farm grant, I'm here. The next deadline is October 1st, and we probably won't have another deadline for the small farm grant until February 1st. So get with me if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. For our first speaker, I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Kirk Pomper, our Dean for the College of Agriculture here at Kentucky State University. So at this time, let's give our undivided attention to Dr. Pomper.
Well, good morning, everybody. Actually, I'm going to take my dean's hat and put it over here and put on my horticulturist hat, because that's really what we're here to talk about today is Pawpaw. And welcome, everybody. I can't even tell you how many Pawpaw field days we've actually had at K-State, but it's been quite a few, over 20, yeah. And so I'm really glad that those of you who have not been here before, how many people have been at a Third Thursday previously for Pawpaw? Okay, quite a few, but quite a few new folks too. And then I always ask this question, how many of you have tasted or had a Pawpaw before? Okay, well, there you go. And that's why you're here, I guess. So there you go. So today I'm gonna, as soon as we cue up the talk, I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about Pawpaw 1. Oops, I gotta get that. There we go. Yep. There we go. Yep, there we go. New technology for us now. Pawpaw, just a little basics about Pawpaw. Many of you already know about this, but its scientific name is Asimina triloba, and it's actually in the custard apple family, and so it's actually Cherimoya, Maricata. Those are actually in the same family as Pawpaw, and so sometimes you'll find Cherimoya for sale, even at our local Walmart, and it has kind of a similar scent, to a Pawpaw, but you can kind of see that Pawpaw has that kind of tropical background in that family. It's the only temperate member of that Pawpaw family, and it's usually very much a medium-sized tree. I'll show you in a minute. It's usually in the understory, but when you grow it under full sun, it really forms more of a pyramidal tree. And of course, then we've got clusters of fruit, and that's why a lot of people. I think I met someone from Indiana earlier. A lot of times they'll call it the Indiana banana or the Kentucky banana if you're from Kentucky. You can kind of see where that comes from with these clusters. Usually high numbers of fruit in a cluster is not a good thing, though. We'll kind of talk about that when you harvest at some point today. But it's better to have fewer fruit per cluster or single fruit. But a lot of times you'll see these large clusters, mind you, of a banana, and sometimes those fruit can weigh up to 1 pound each. Tropical-like flavor and aroma, of course, banana, mango, pineapple. Some have more of other flavors. Some folks have gone out in the woods and tried a Pawpaw for the first time. Sometimes they have some kind of turpentine flavors, right? And so that's something that does happen sometimes. The genetics of the wild trees are not always good. But many people have selected varieties out there that have these really good flavors. And something like NC1 is more cantaloupe flavored, and something like KSU Atwood's more mango flavored. It really is high in nutritious, high in antioxidants and minerals. Not as high as, say, blueberry, but it's fairly high. And you see a real interest by homeowners across Kentucky for pawpaws and landscapes. Not only is there nice fall color, but you'll see a few of these butterflies out there. It's the zebra swallowtail butterfly, and an exclusive caterpillar food source are pawpaw leaves. So if you see this butterfly, that means there's some pawpaws nearby, right? And so it's another nice attribute to pawpaw. And you see the flowers up above. It's kind of a meaty kind of aroma, and not a real showy flower, but still attractive. And, this is the native range of pawpaw. So it really is, we're right smack in the middle of the native range of pawpaw. And you'll see it go as far north kind of as into southern Ontario, and as far west as kind of the piney woods area, Texas, north, and then you'll see it go fairly far south. It is a temperate tree, right? Needs a little bit of chilling to be able to leaf out and have flowers. So when you go too far into Florida, they'll have difficulty growing. So this is actually over in Cove Spring Park right over here. Those are thousands of pawpaw stems came up out of the ground. A lot of times these patches are a clonal, right? So they sucker. And if you do put a tree in your yard or at your farm, be ready for that suckering, because if you don't mow around it for a little while or use some type of wood chip mulch or cultivate, you're going to get lots of suckers. And so you do need to keep those down. But in native patches, there'll be hundreds of trees in a patch, and they might all genetically be the same because they all came from the same root system. And so sometimes we'll have folks call us or email Sheri or Jeremy and I, and they'll say, I've got this pawpaw patch and never have any fruit on that patch. And of course, there's several reasons for that. Well, maybe it's really heavily shaded, right? Because like any other tree fruit, it likes the shade, but if it gets too much shade, it doesn't have enough energy to produce fruit. But also, you've got a lack of cross-pollination that can go on because it's maybe just one genetic type, right? And also another is lack of pollinators, and flies and beetles are kind of the main pollinators of pawpaw. So, once again, it's sometimes you don't have a lot of flies around. We've got all kinds of goats here at the farm, you probably noticed. So we never want for flies for pollination in the spring. So, pawpaw has a rich history. It's always amazes to me whenever we go around and talk to groups. There's a lot of people who know something about pawpaw, even if they haven't seen one, just because maybe their grandparents talked about going and gathering pawpaws. But, you can go all the way back to 1541, and there's comments about DeSoto finding Native Americans eating pawpaws. Lewis and Clark actually wrote in their journal about how pawpaws saved them in terms of stretching their rations on their way back from Oregon. And John Filson, who's a Kentucky kind of frontiersman, also talked about how wonderful pawpaws were in Kentucky. And of course, once again, you can't prove these things. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Daniel Boone, all purported pawpaw fans. But anyways, so once again, a lot of folks who know about pawpaw. And back in 1916, there was even a contest by the American Genetics Association to try and find the best pawpaws. So people would send in these pawpaws, and there were winners that, and there was a comment that was actually published in the American Genetics Association journal back then, that intelligent breeding would result in commercial quality varieties and industry would begin. And of course, we just haven't quite seen that, have we? We saw other crops kind of come on, and I think a lot of this is because pawpaw fruit are highly perishable, right? They really didn't have much refrigeration back in the early parts of the year of around 1916. And blueberry was another kind of Native American, right, fruit that didn't need to be refrigerated, and so that probably caught on more. But for whatever reasons, it did not really develop. And but there's always been folks who kind of kept it going, and some were we didn't have it on this slide, but some were the North American fruit explorers who actually went around and collected material. There was a Pawpaw Foundation founded by Neil Peterson, and if you get into pawpaw at all, you're going to hear about Neil Peterson, because Neil Peterson has worked at pawpaw many years. We've worked with Neil. I've known Neil many years. He's gone out and selected some very good varieties out there, like Shenandoah, Susquehanna, really good ones. And so he started the Pawpaw Foundation in 1988. In 1990, the program started here with Brett Calloway, went to Desmond Lane, and then I took it over after about 1998. And then we see the Ohio Pawpaw Festival. How many people were up at the festival up in Athens? Got a few people? Yeah, great. I know it was about 10,000 people now, they were saying. So it's grown significantly, you know, in the last 20 years. So it's really a lot of popularity. But I think people do like to get together for festivals. But I do think Pawpaw has been a real good. That's been a good thing to be able to raise the awareness of Pawpaw. And then we have the Ohio Pawpaw growers, but we also have the North American Pawpaw growers in 2000. I don't think Ron Powell is here today, but hopefully he's going to be here too, who helped start all that. So basically, you know, we're really interested in Pawpaw from the point of view that we would like to have Pawpaw be something for small farmers as a new crop, right? And people are always kind of looking for different things. I may have hit the button too many times. And so basically, what we're looking at is trying to increase the awareness of Pawpaw, find new varieties, and be able to process it ultimately because of that perishability. And you know, Sheri, Jeremy, and I, we looked at, we're going to talk about processing later, but you know, we found a number of ways to hand process pulp. And I think some good examples are down at Jeff and Creed. They processed, I think, about 6,000 pounds of Pawpaw. So there are some devices we have out there now that can be used to separate the pulp from the seed. The biggest problem is trying to separate the skin from the pulp, right? Because a lot of devices leave a little skin, and if you eat some of that skin, it's pretty bitter, right? So that's been kind of the limiting factor on processing with Pawpaw. But there are some pretty good ways, like the Roma saucer for the homeowner. Using that grape spiral, you can actually process quite easily, and that's only a $100 device, and you can crank out a lot of Pawpaw pulp for various things using that device. Beer, wine, brandy, moonshine, that's kind of the main products right now you see commercially from Pawpaw. Jeff and Creed brandy is up there in the corner. They've been marketing that, but it's been very successful for them. There's been many little craft microbreweries around that produce Pawpaw beer, including Sig Lusher down here at near K-State over here in Frankfurt. But you know, that's been a really good way to introduce Pawpaw to people too. And of course, Fresh Market, that's maybe the biggest way, but there's definitely that product interest. And with that pulp, you can make really great items. And we've worked with a number of chefs through the years. And you know, anything that you can make with banana, you can usually use Pawpaw with. But the key item is with Pawpaw is that if you bake it very long, some of the pawpaw-iness, right, goes off. There's a lot of these volatiles that really give that flavor and aroma for Pawpaw. And if you start baking it very long, any recipe that involves a lot of baking, you'll lose some of that Pawpaw flavor, right? So that's something to keep in mind when you're trying to find certain dishes. But it can make a great creme brulee. It can make really great items and pies. So we used to do this, but it's a lot of work, so we didn't do it today. But if you take a biscuit, basically, and put Pawpaw pulp in the middle, fold it over, deep fry it. Of course, everything's good deep fried, right? But anyways, with Pawpaw in the middle, it's really good. And so that's different things you can do with Pawpaw that are very attractive. And there's definitely a fresh market potential. You'll go to a lot of farmers markets across that whole region now of the Southeast, and you will see folks selling for maybe $2 to $4 per pound. And online, you can buy fruit online, and I guess the only thing we'll caution you is that sometimes they don't ship real well. And so if people ship very ripe fruit, if you're buying that, it may be a little bruised, and when you get a bruised fruit, there's a little bit of off flavor sometimes associated with that bruising, so that can be a problem. But overall, those are good markets right now for the fruit. And of course, if you process it, there's the value-added products for restaurants, wineries, and breweries. So once again, kind of our goals, and we're going to focus on other things in a little while. But outside, we're as a land-grant university, our goal is to take the risks that farmers don't want to take and try and figure things out, right? And how we can grow a crop better, or what we can do to process it better, or how we can develop a new, better variety. And so that's really what we've been trying to do. We've been going out collecting material, had a lot of graduate students that gone out and collected material from various native sites. We've tried to breed to develop better pawpaws, and then develop orchard management recommendations, and then deliver all that information out there via whatever vehicle we can, whether the website or these types of talks. And so I'm just going to quickly say that some of the things we've done, I've had a number of graduate students. I'm not sure where our 2 students are right now. Okay, they can wave. There they are. Yep, thank you. And so they're working on some of these projects right now, or will be. And propagation, orchard establishment. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's the best way to establish an orchard, and Jeremy's going to tell you about some of that. What's the best ways to propagate for nurseries, and Sheri's going to talk to you about that. What are the chilling requirements for flowers if you're going to plant varieties from different areas and different parts of the country, and it's breeding. And I think. In fact, I look at this photograph and I think of the plunge of temperature we were talking about a little earlier when I came in. We see some pretty quick drops in temperature, but the other thing we see spring frosts, right? And that can be a real problem for pawpaw and peaches and apples, but we don't want them to flower, at a wrong time where it might get frost. But what we don't know is how much chilling hours, right, are required, or hours between basically about 35 degrees and 0 to do the biological clock that's in the bud to tell it to break and it's spring. And so, we know a lot about this for peaches and apples. There are low chill apples out there like Anne, which only take a few hundred hours to be able to be chilled and still produce a crop. And then there are higher chill apples. And so we're looking at the same thing with pawpaw, because you accumulate those chilling hours, and if you don't get enough, you get delayed leaf emergence, and you'll not flower early enough either. And so just some of the things, we've had students go and collect branches every week from like Christmas time through into the spring, and bring those branches in. And we're keeping track of the number of hours at those temperatures, chilling hours that they're accumulating. And then we're looking at, okay, here's a dormant flower, here's half expanded and then open, even though it's not really a colorful flower at that point. So how many hours of chilling for the different varieties that are out there to break? And so this is a little hard to see. This is a whole bunch of different varieties that are very commonly planted around that we recommend many of these, some we don't, but originated and were selected in different parts of the country. But amazingly, they almost all kind of have a similar amount of chilling requirement, around 600 to 700 hours. And so it's not a high chill, but it's not really a low chill crop either. And that kind of makes some sense, because we do see it flower usually, in April, sometime in April. And so it's, even earlier in April now than it used to be. And so basically it's you would have thought that maybe there'd be a little more variation. We didn't have a huge variation of where some of these were originally from. But what it tells you is that you can pretty much plant any of those varieties in areas of adequate chilling that I showed you on the map that would be north of Florida, right? And you're still going to get a good crop. And so then some other things we've been doing, we talked about that they flower April. The good thing and the bad thing about a pawpaw tree, you probably have seen this if you have one at home, they'll start flowering in April, but you get a peak, but then you'll keep getting flowers for quite a long time. And so once again, you're going to have fruit set at different times. So you're going to have fruit set at different times, so you're going to have them ripen at different times in the fall too. The frustrating thing is one cluster comes from one flower, and you might still end up with fruit ripening at different times, even in one cluster, which is kind of odd, but that's how pawpaw is. And so you're going to be harvesting from the same tree for quite a long time. That's just part of the pawpaw flower biology and ripening. But we do suggest that you that you plant other varieties next to each other to cross-pollinate. And there's been a lot of folks who wondered if they're self-fruitful, and some of these are Neil Peterson, because he wants to have a larger European garden market with pawpaw. You'd like to, and most of the time people only plant like one of everything, right? Because it's smaller land plots. And so can you plant one pawpaw tree and still get fruit, right? And that's a good question. And so we actually did take a look at that. And this is kind of a complicated thing, but the main thing I want to point out is the yellow line. If you do cross between, say, like sunflower and Susquehanna, you get maybe about 11% set. If Susquehanna and sunflower, it's ladies first whenever you do crosses. So if it's Susquehanna by sunflower, you use the pollen from that direction. So about 16% fruit set. The interesting thing is you still see some selfing on these with the Susquehanna, about 13% fruit set. So what this says is, there's a lot of variation in this. You still can get self-fruitful, you'll still get some fruit on a tree if it's by itself. And we've seen this before in isolated trees, different places. But it may vary by the variety, right, which is something we're looking at. And it just, once again, if you plant multiple varieties, you're still going to have a better chance of a better fruit set. But that's one of those questions that we wanted to answer. So yeah, you can probably plant a single tree, and many years you're going to get some fruit, but it's going to depend on the variety. Over at the Franklin County Extension Office, there's a lone pawpaw seedling, and every year I look at it, and it's this beautiful tree and has all these flowers, and it never has a fruit, right? Because it's probably more of an outcrosser than maybe Susquehanna is. So once again, the moral of the story is plant more pawpaws. Who wouldn't, right? That's what you should do anyway. Yeah.
What do you mean exactly by true type?
So, just like we have apple trees that are varieties, and that's the perfect timing for this slide, is that if you take a seed out of a red delicious apple, it is the result of sexual recombination, so the seed is not true to the original red delicious, right? Just like our children are different from us, it's going to be different. Now, in horticulture, we've been cloning for a long time. What we'll do is we'll take a branch, like it has with the red delicious apple, from the original tree, take that bud or branch and propagate it on a rootstock, and then it grows into the tree, and it's genetically the same as the same tree. That's how we clone things, right? And perpetuate the same really good varieties. But if you take a seed and plant it, it's going to be the result of whatever recombination of genes from the parent, right, and another parent. And so you never know what you're going to get. So I will admit that a lot of times we plant seed from really good varieties that are the result of crosses, and we get some pretty good fruit from those seedlings, but we don't always, right? So the only way to really make sure you're going to get a really good fruit quality is to plant grafted or clonally propagated trees, right? And some of those, you'll see these listed in a lot of different nursery catalogs, and I'll show you KSU Atwood and Benson in a minute, but these are varieties that have been selected by various people, either K-State, entrepreneurs, or Neil Peterson through the years. Now, the good thing about grafted trees, too, is that they don't have to go through a period of juvenility like seedlings do, and so they will flower quicker, maybe at about 3 or 4 years, and produce fruit. If you plant a seedling, it might be 7 years, might be 8 years before you get a fruit or a flower. So there is a good reason to do that. But, now is the shameless promotion time. So if you do want some very good varieties, once again, there's many good Neil Peterson varieties out there, like Susquehanna and Shenandoah. But KSU Atwood is a really good release from our program, very mango-like, really a good variety. Benson is also a very good one. It's very round, right, and very, very attractive fruit, and it's early. And I think I had one more, but I went right through it. Whoops, I'm going the wrong direction. There we go. I wanted to show you Chappelle, which I think is Jeremy and Sheri's favorite, actually, but it is a heavy producer, has a great flavor. This picture is still a little, not quite, doesn't do the pulp justice because it is just a little deeper orange than that. But it's a beautiful fruit. There are some fruit out on the Chappelle tree that you probably could take a look at if we go out and take a look, but Lowe seed also. So these are 3 that we've released. And they'll all be at the tasting, so you'll be able to try some of these, see what you think. We do have others that we have in the pipeline that we're hoping to release, and then we have a lot of seedlings. And that's kind of the point of my next slide is we've planted over 1,500 seedling trees out there that are a result of different crosses we've made, and so they're starting to produce fruit. I'm hoping to spend a lot of time out there next fall trying the various fruit from these different selections. Hopefully, maybe the next big, great Pawpaw cultivar is going to be out there for us to find. The most frustrating thing about Pawpaw breeding is sometimes you'll have this beautiful giant fruit. It'll look so tasty, and you'll eat it, and it's like, really bad. But that's the really fun thing about Pawpaw is, and that's why we used to have these bumper stickers. I'd rather be Pawpaw hunting, right? It's fun to go out there, try wild fruit too, and see what you find. So if you want to find more information, of course, go to our Facebook page. We do update that fairly regularly, and then the KSU Pawpaw page. I do think the KSU website's about to undergo a reconfiguration, but we'll still have a Pawpaw page on there at the end, but it may change within a month or 2. So, do you have any questions for me yet? I'm looking at, I don't know where we are in time. So we got about 5 or 10 minutes for questions. So what are your questions out there about Pawpaw? Yep, there's somebody over here.
You mentioned ways to use the fresh pawpaws, from ice creams to jams to baking with them. What about preservation?
So,
freezing?
That's a good question. So you can make a very good jam, pawpaw jam, and there's a number of people who do actually make pawpaw jams. We've tried a number of different recipes for pawpaw jam. Once again, I do think the best thing you can do if you want to use pawpaw in products like baked goods is to extract the pulp and then freeze it, because that means you're not heating it and losing those volatiles right until you're actually at that step of the baked good. So that's the best thing to do, because when you heat up the jam, it does lose some of that pawpaw-iness, right? And so that's what I would recommend. Some people will freeze the whole fruit, but I think that's kind of a problematic thing, because then you're thawing that whole fruit, right? You're really better off take the fresh fruit, however you're going to do it. What we'll do is, cut it open, scoop out the pulp, and then and seed, and then separate that. That's probably the better thing to do than freeze the whole pulp. I think their question.
Follow up on that. You guys ever freeze dry?
We have tried some freeze drying. Now, here's one kind of thing we should talk about, like fruit leather pawpaw. For whatever reason, if you try and do that, yeah, freeze drying. We haven't done a lot of it. So I'm not sure I'd recommend it, but you could try it. I did want to bring up fruit leather though, because you reminded me that when you make a fruit leather, it apparently kind of concentrates things. There's almost like we almost think there's an enzymatic reaction or something, because it tends to make people not feel good when they eat it, and we're not really too sure why. And so we don't recommend fruit leather. I don't know if it just concentrates everything or if there's an enzymatic reaction, but a lot of times people will eat it and go, it was not good. There's another question. Well, right here, yeah.
I've noticed on your website a lot of the tests that you do, like with looking for root stocks, or the one that you showed earlier with pollination, you use sunflower and Susquehanna a lot. Mm-hmm. Why do you gravitate towards those two instead of, like, say, overlease, which a lot of other people seem to gravitate towards?
Right. So the reason that they're in a lot of parentage and why we've worked with them a lot, those are two very interesting varieties. Susquehanna is an extremely good tasting variety from Neil Peterson. Tends to be kind of a lower yielding variety though, right? And so, and then there's some we didn't really talk about. There's acetogenin compounds that are in the fruit and in the bark, and those are kind of anti-cancer compounds, but we don't necessarily want high levels of acetogenins. And although Susquehanna is kind of in the middle, we have found that sunflower is very low in acetogenins. And the thing about sunflower is it produces very, very well. It is a very high producing pawpaw. So a lot of times what we're trying to do is get a, kind of the bell-shaped curve of seedlings out of those crosses. And we've also spent a lot of time looking at those two because Susquehanna tends to have kind of a lack of vigor and sunflower is more vigorous. And so we've done a number of experiments where we tried using seedling rootstock to try and kind of control the top, right? So we got a seedling rootstock, put a bud of Susquehanna or sunflower on it, and see if we can affect the growth of the scion or that bud. And so hence we've had a lot of trees with those types of combinations, so that's why we worked with a lot too. But those, they kind of represent the two ends of the spectrums on different things. And so hence, Susquehanna is just so darn tasty. It's really tasty, but it just tends to underproduce. I've got a Susquehanna and a Shenandoah at home, and I've got all these fruit on the Shenandoah tree, and then I'll have 10 fruit on my Susquehanna. So that's a lot. That's why we're working with it, trying to maybe put some of the yield components of sunflower into some of those crosses with Susquehanna flavor, maybe, right? Yeah, that's the frustrating thing about Susquehanna. It's just, a low producer, but always does really well in our taste tests, usually. So sunflower, it tastes okay. It's good for processing high yields. Okay, next question. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to go pawpaw hunting, but what kind of terrain, slope, aspect, soil type should I be looking for?
So, a lot of times you're going to find pawpaws along streams, right? And so if you walk, along many areas of Kentucky, like the Cumberland Falls area, you'll find them all over the place. It does kind of vary a little bit in certain regions, and it probably is somewhat soil type, although pawpaw is pretty resilient, and Jeremy will tell you about this, to a range of pH, but they don't do well with heavy clay, and so but they like water, so they like the moisture. So that's why you'll find them along the stream beds a lot. Sometimes you will find a pawpaw patch up on top of a hillside or almost a mountainside. And the thought is, if you look at pawpaw patches, they're like little stems, right, that are marching along. And if there was a stream that came down from the top of a mountain, maybe that pawpaw patch kind of marched up but died as it went up, and ends up here, and that's where it is. I kind of think about, over the course of 100 years, marching pawpaw patches, right? And so that may be why you find them higher sometimes, but normally they're going to be kind of in that kind of river bottom kind of area. They don't want to be flooded for long periods of time either, but if it's moist, they're gonna like that kind of environment. So you can hike in a lot of areas in Kentucky. I know that Neil Peterson has hiked like the CO Canal in Maryland is a good area to go look for pawpaws too. So those are some areas you can go pawpaw hunting. Yep.
Hi, sorry, I'm over here. To your right. Mm-hmm. Hi, I know with apples, there are a lot of varietals and that you'll have better luck with pollination if you have varietals in the same bloom schedule, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Is there anything similar to that with pawpaws, that they have certain varietals that cross-pollinate better, or do they all bloom at the same time and all cross-pollinate well?
So, we still don't know all the answers to that, except that, we do know that certain, like sunflower and Susquehanna will cross, right? The thing about pawpaw is, and this kind of is indicative of that chilling data I showed you, in the spring, they tend to kind of all kind of peak at the same time, right? And it probably is because they need about the same amount of chilling, and then the heat activates them, and you'll just get this everything flowering at once. So there's not a lot of variation in flowering time. I think yet to this day, the safest thing is to plant 3 different varieties, right? And they're going to flower about the same time. Now, the tails of the flowering may vary a little bit. Some might flower a little longer than others. But yeah, there's basically not a lot of timing difference with those. Yeah. Other questions?
Is there a Pawpaw cookbook or recipe book?
There is. Now, we still have some on our website, but there is a cookbook that Ron Powell and the Ohio Pawpaw Growers was selling, and I don't know if he's sold out of that, so I will check and try and find out for that. It's an excellent cookbook with many, many recipes that they've gone out and tried, basically, with pawpaw that were used for other fruit, and it works very well. Yeah. Oh, there's a question.
Can you plant these just out in an open field?
So there's a question about, shading requirements. So here's the thing. So pawpaw is a native understory tree, right? So but if you want to get maximum fruit production, they do need to be out more in full sun. And you'll see the orchards out here, they're out in full sun. I will say that they often benefit from a windbreak, or at least, some maybe shading in the late afternoon. Actually, Greg Rieger and I have talked about this. Sometimes when you plant pawpaw trees together, they almost form hedges. And we're not sure that's a bad thing, because you get a little bit of maybe windbreak and just a little bit of shading that way, and that might benefit them. But it's a sliding scale, right? Because if you get too much shade, you'll get less fruit. But they will tolerate the full sun, and they will produce the best fruit loads probably, but there are limits to that maybe where you're going to stress them a little bit at times too. And so that's why out here, I think this is like about the harshest environment where we grow, because there's no windbreak. There are some other pawpaw trees around, but it's pretty much full sun wherever we're planting, and they do well. Yeah. Other questions?
I have a question about the waste products of the pawpaw. Any uses for the skin or the seeds, medicinal properties, or anything of that nature?
So two things. One is, seed's very popular because nurseries want the seed. They want to use it for rootstock or seedling production. So a lot of people sell their seed. The seed actually, we didn't talk about this, but the seed has an alkaloid inside that is an aromatic. So, it used to be used actually by, I guess, Lilly, that they would extract out the alkaloid and use it, to make you throw up, right, if you had eaten some poison. And so the key is, and this is a problem, sometimes people will tell me I got sick from eating something with pawpaw, and I think sometimes the problem is people will miss a seed or a part of a seed, and they will blend that seed in with their pulp, and then they just put some alkaloid in there, right, and it's a pretty strong alkaloid, so you don't want to grind up the seeds into the pulp. That's a really important thing. But the seed itself, basically the value is for nurseries right now. Yeah.
You was talking about that these trees need to be in an area, and it may be addressed later on in the orchard management part. But I have some that have gone, some trees, small ones, seedlings, down along the riverbed where I'm at. Mm-hmm. And we haven't had a flood event, and I'm worried about it. We have a flood event at some point, which we're praying for rain. We need rain in our area like a lot of places.
Yeah.
When is the best time, or what steps do I take to transfer them trees for where they're at if I really want to get into working with these saplings?
So you're talking about trying to move the trees?
Move them so I can manage them better, and plus get them out of that flood zone.
So it's a really difficult proposition, because a lot of times there's two things going on. One is a lot of those trees form deep tap roots, and they're very difficult when they're fairly large to move successfully. The other thing is that a lot of times, if you've got, we talked about these clonal patches, right? Sometimes those are actually root suckers with poorly developed root systems. So if you try and move them, you've got a bad, poor root system, and they don't move too well. So, sometimes people partially sever the root system a little bit to try and get it to be honest, the best thing you can do is just go out and get new material and start in a better spot. I hate to say that. That's the best use of your time. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Maybe one more question.
Dr. Pomper.
Yeah.
I was just curious in that you and Director Crabtree had talked about all those in the wild that just do not produce any fruit. Out of the thousands that I've found in the wild, I found one with one fruit. But I've never heard anywhere on all your symposia that I've watched on YouTube, you've never said anything about, are the pollinators becoming extinct? Are they becoming less as we get into the year 2023? In contrast, because it sounds like our great-grandfathers found a lot more wild fruit than what we do.
Well, you know, I think there's several things with that. Is that, you know, urban encroachment or just building, we tend to develop areas where pawpaw likes to live, right? And so we either farm it or we put in residences and we destroy those areas. We bought a new farm to do some additional work on just north of here. It's 100 acres, and I can't find a pawpaw on that entire farm because it's been heavily farmed for a long time. Not one pawpaw, native pawpaw on the entire farm, even though we got 30 acres of woods on it. So I wouldn't say it's in danger of being extinct, but I would say that like any other, you know, of our wild places, we're losing some of those places where those trees grow. And of course, it's a cycling. Some of the areas where pawpaw grew a number of years ago might be getting more larger canopy, and so hence they struggle to grow in that understory, right? There's a natural kind of cycle that goes on with the forests and with the pawpaw understory trees, and so I think you know, some people have written concern that we're losing pawpaw patches, like up in Ontario. I know there's not a lot of patches up there, but a lot of that's because of urban growth, right?
Well, I'm sorry, I was more implying, are the beetles and the flies, are they specific to pollinating pawpaws? Are they becoming extinct?
I would say probably not. And here's the thing: is that a lot of different flies and other insects visit. In fact, one of my students has captured, using a trap, all the insects that are visiting flowers. And he's trying to key out all these many flies. And you know, the thing about insects is that many flies all look alike, right? And it's really hard to even get them down to a family. There's so many different types. So I would say that the only thing is, you know, I don't think that's a pollinator issue, other than sometimes we change the environment and there might be fewer pollinators there to pollinate, and that's always, you know, potential. You know, a lot of times people will go into wild patches and they'll try and put something out like chicken or, you know, or roadkill to try and attract flies. And that's one thing you can do for native patches. Yeah. So, all right. Well, I think probably we're about ready to run out of time. So, thank you. And I'll be around all day today. So we'll turn it over to Sheri Crabtree.
Again, thank you, Dr. Pomper, for that presentation, Pawpaw 101 Research and Update. Next, we have the honor of having Ms. Sheri Crabtree. She will speak with us on Pawpaw propagation. So at this time, we have Ms. Sheri Crabtree.
Thank you, Edwin, and thank you all for coming. It's good to see a good crowd here always. So I want to talk about how to propagate pawpaws if you want to start and grow your own plants. There's a couple of ways you can do that. So there's propagation by seed, and there is vegetative or clonal propagation, which with pawpaw that means grafting. So we're going to talk about both of those methods to produce new pawpaw plants, you know, kind of how to do it. So there's pros and cons of both seed and vegetative propagation. So seed, Dr. Pomper mentioned, I think there was a question earlier. So pawpaw is not true to type from seed, meaning if you save a seed from a fruit, it's not going to be identical to the tree, the fruit that you got it from. It's going to be a cross of the two parents, which that could be a good thing or a bad thing. It's just unknown quality with seeds. Seedlings, as Dr. Pomper also mentioned, take longer to produce. You're looking at 7 to 8 years before the tree gets old enough to produce fruit when it's grown from seed, as opposed to 3 to 4 years with a grafted tree. Seed, on the other hand, it may be easier, less expensive than grafting, and that is how we develop new varieties. So since the seedlings are a cross of the two parents, that's how we breed new varieties. You make a cross of two trees that have qualities that you want, that have good tasting fruit, high yields, disease resistance, and you're trying to breed new and improved varieties. So that's how we do that, is by seed, by hand pollination, making crosses, and saving the seed. Grafting, again, it's a type of vegetative propagation. So that's the only way to propagate pawpaw, what's called true to type, so identical to the parent. If you want to propagate KSU Atwood, you need to graft a new tree or purchase a grafted tree. If you save the seed from KSU Atwood, it's going to be a cross of Atwood and whatever pollinated it. And again, faster to produce fruit from grafted trees. The only drawback really, might require a little bit more skill or experience to learn how to graft fruit trees than just planting a seed. So the pawpaw seeds, if you've eaten the fruit, I think a lot of you here have, they have pretty good sized seeds. So usually a row, either 1 or 2 seeds down the middle of the fruit, or 1 or 2 rows of seeds down the middle of the fruit usually ends up being, maybe 6 to 8 seeds per fruit. Pretty large, so they're about the size and the shape of a lima bean, flat, dark brown, hard, usually about 1 inch long, 1/2 inch wide, so they're pretty good sized. And Dr. Pomper mentioned this, so pawpaw seeds are not edible. You're not going to accidentally eat a seed as you're eating the fruit. They're so large and hard, but you don't want to accidentally get a seed in the blender when you're making a milkshake or a puree or something, because they do have compounds that will make you sick. So how do you save pawpaw seeds if you're wanting to save seeds from a fruit and plant them yourself? So the first step, you want to remove the seeds from the fruit and just clean off any of the flesh that's sticking to the fruit so that doesn't mold in storage. We used to, when were cleaning smaller amounts of seeds, a lot of times we would put the seeds in a bucket of water and kind of have them in a mesh bag, like a mesh laundry bag, and just kind of use that bag to scrub against the seed to remove the pulp that was adhering to the seed. You don't want mold to grow on the seeds ideally, so we usually do a rinse with a 10% bleach solution, just bleach diluted with water, and then you rinse that again with water to prevent mold growth in the seeds. There are commercial seed cleaners, and that's actually what we use now, is a bigger device that's made to clean seeds, but smaller scale. You don't need a big commercial seed cleaner. You can just kind of clean by hand. So this is kind of the tricky thing about pawpaw seeds. They have very specific storage requirements and requirements to germinate. So they require a period of cool, moist stratification to germinate. So there are 2 very important things with pawpaw seeds. You don't want to let them dry out, and you don't want to store them in the freezer. So they need to be kept moist. And how we do that, we usually store them in damp, like sphagnum peat moss, in Ziploc bags in the refrigerator. And even if they're allowed to sit out at room temperature for even just 5 days, that reduces germination to just 5%. So if you clean the seeds and just leave them out on your counter, just a few days is going to reduce your germination a lot. And again, store them in the refrigerator. Don't store them in the freezer, because that will kill the seeds. And since they do have that stratification requirement, they need to be stored in the refrigerator for at least 100 days to fulfill that cold stratification requirement before they will germinate in the spring. You can store them for longer than that, so over 100 days is fine. You can store the seeds for up to 2 years, and there won't be really any loss in germination up to the 2-year point. After that, germination will start to drop a little bit year by year after that 2-year point. So if you store the seeds, stratify them properly, usually we'll get 80–85% germination with seeds. So you should get pretty good germination rates as long as you don't let them dry out, freeze, and they get enough cold stratification. So then when you plant the seeds, generally you want to plant them about 1 inch deep. If you plant them too shallow, sometimes you'll see this happen. The seed coat will stick to the little seedling as it comes out of the soil, and that can be a problem. It can even, if that seed coat doesn't want to shed off, it can break the little growth tip of the seedling off. So you don't want to plant them too shallow, so usually about an inch deep. Pawpaws do have a taproot, so they need to be started in a deep pot to accommodate the taproot. And this photo, you can see the pots that we use in the greenhouse. These are 14 inches deep, these pots, and they're pretty narrow. Pawpaws don't have a lot of root branching, so it's really these deep, narrow pots is what we use. The soil mix, the brand that we actually use is Pro Mix, but what it is 70% peat, 20% perlite, and 10% vermiculite, so you can, make your own soil mix. There's various brands. And that is kind of a slightly acid to neutral pH. So as far as growing the seeds, what kind of conditions do they need to germinate? They need warm temperatures to germinate, so the ideal temperatures for germination is 75 to 85 Fahrenheit. You can use bottom heat, like heat mats that you sometimes see for starting seeds, will help them germinate and grow a little bit faster. If you use supplemental lighting, we've used 16-hour lighting in our greenhouses. So pawpaws, I think Dr. Pomper may have mentioned this, they require shade when they're very small. So we usually use shade cloth in the greenhouse, so about 30% shade if they're in the greenhouse, because the greenhouse provides a little bit of protection otherwise. If we're starting them outdoors, and you can see the photos of the shade cloth that we use in the greenhouse. So outdoors, we use 50% shade cloth to have a little bit of extra protection. And again, yeah, this is what they look like in the greenhouse. Anything under 18 inches needs some protection from full sun for the small seedlings. So for irrigation, you want to keep them moist, not wet or soggy, so basically a moist but well-drained soil. So fertilization, we'll use fertilization along with our irrigation, usually water-soluble fertilizer, Peters, Miracle Grow, something like that. So pawpaws are fairly slow to germinate. The seed germination will take place in 2 to 3 weeks, and that's mostly the root. So the root will start growing first, and the root will be growing for quite a while before you'll see a shoot above ground. It'll take usually 8 to 10 weeks before you'll see a shoot come up above the soil surface. And you can see these are some of our potted plants in the greenhouse. They will usually take about 2 years before the trees get large enough to plant outside or to graft. So one tricky thing about storing these pawpaw seedlings, they do require a period of winter dormancy. They have to go dormant in the winter time. They require about 800 hours between 32 and 45 Fahrenheit to go dormant in the winter and satisfy that chilling requirement. But the roots can't freeze. So you've got them in pots. You don't want to leave them, outside, just exposed to the open air in wintertime in that pot where the pot's going to freeze solid. So somewhere cool but not too much below freezing is the ideal place to store potted pawpaw trees over the winter. So like a root cellar, an unheated shed, unheated garage, something like that. A walk-in cooler is the ideal place. If you have a walk-in cooler, a lot of people don't have access to something like that. So that's how you store the seedlings over the winter. So we talked about how to start pawpaws from seed. And we discussed that pawpaws are not true to type from seed. So if you're wanting to propagate a specific cultivar, if you really love overlease and you want to produce more overlease trees that are identical, that are overlease, how do you do that? So different methods of vegetative or clonal propagation. These are some that are used in different plants, different species. So a lot of plants you can take a little cutting of it and just stick that in water, stick that in rooting hormone, and that will produce roots. Pawpaw, unfortunately, it's not that easy. So grafting and budding is how we propagate pawpaws true to type. And we'll kind of go through some experiences we've had with all of these. So stem cuttings, pawpaws basically will not root from stem cuttings. There was a study that a graduate student did many years ago. She had 1 out of over 5,000 stem cuttings produced roots from mature plants. So that's 0.02% rooting. So this is not, stem cuttings are not a successful method of producing these pawpaw cultivars. Root cuttings, actually, good sized root cuttings, a little bit over 50% of them rooted. The problem with root cuttings is most of these cultivars that we're wanting to propagate don't exist anymore on their own roots. The mother tree has died, and so they're not around anymore. And also, even if it does exist, it's a little bit hard to dig the roots and tell which tree you're getting the roots from if they're in an orchard and they're close together. So root cuttings might have some potential, but it's not really a very practical method of propagation. So layering, I actually did a lot of work with different layering methods on my master's thesis, and unfortunately none of them, it was interesting, there was enough rooting that made it a little bit interesting, but none of them worked very well. Layering is basically a form of propagation where you try to root a piece of the shoot while it's still attached to the mother plant. So similar to cuttings, but it still is attached to the mother plant. And it's used in a lot of species that are a little bit harder to root, like nut trees. They're also used to produce apple rootstocks, layering. So we looked at, these are various methods of layering, but they're all kind of the same principle of you're trying to root a shoot while it still is attached to the mother plant. So trench layering, you kind of lay the plant down horizontally, let the shoots come up, and you cover that with some kind of rooting medium, soil, or a lot of times just sawdust is used, some kind of medium. We had 20% rooting in trench layering, which is a lot better than the stem cuttings, but it was only young seedlings that rooted using that method. So there's a lot of how juvenile the plant is plays into whether pawpaw will root from cuttings or layering. Pot layering, which is basically where you have your plant in a pot, you put a bottomless pot on top of it, and again, put some rooting medium inside of it, let the shoots come out. Treat that with rooting hormone, auxin, which is a rooting hormone. And we had 10% rooting with pot layering. Mound layering, which is done outside, you cut a tree back and cover that with a rooting medium. The new shoots come up, and you treat those with rooting hormone. Had 9% rooting, and air layering, none rooted. So you see, it's better than we were with seedlings, but these aren't rooting percentages that would be good enough for a nursery to want to use those methods to propagate pawpaw. But it's something, we might want to do some more research on in the future. But we used a lot of different levels of rooting hormone and different concentrations and delivery methods, and this was pretty much the best that we could get. Tissue culture, some plants are produced in labs, and tissue culture in vitro. And again, pawpaw is just very difficult to root. So they could get shoots to proliferate in tissue culture, but they couldn't get those shoots to root very well. And there was a German company that had a protocol that would work to root these little plantlets in tissue culture somewhat, but it wasn't really a commercially viable method. So since basically none of those other methods of propagating pawpaw true to type clonally work, how do we propagate pawpaw varieties true to type? So we do that by grafting or budding. And so we do that onto seedlings and pots in the greenhouse, or you can do that to trees already growing out in the field. And so essentially grafting is just the process of connecting two plant parts. So the scion, which is the top of the tree, and the rootstock, the roots that are bottom of the tree, they will grow together, they'll unite and basically grow into one plant. And budding is just a form of grafting that uses a single bud instead of a stick with multiple buds. So some kind of terminology with grafting. So the rootstock is the plant that you're grafting onto. That's going to be the root system of your grafted tree. And so in the case of pawpaw, that will be a pawpaw seedling. So you can graft onto any pawpaw seedling. It does have to be pawpaw, so you can't graft pawpaw onto apple or peach or an oak tree or something like that. But any pawpaw seedling you graft onto. The scion is the desired cultivar that we're wanting to propagate. So that's the part that is going to be the shoot system, the upper part of the grafted tree. And I'll mention this a few times in kind of how to graft. So the vascular cambium, the cambium is the layer under the bark, kind of between the bark and the wood, where cell division takes place. And so it's important when you're grafting that the cambium of the rootstock and the scion are in close contact with each other, because since that's where cell division takes place, that's where the cells are growing, and that's how the rootstock and scion are going to heal and grow together, is where that cell division is taking place. So if you're too shallow and you just kind of scrape off the bark, or if you go too deep and it's in the heartwood, there's not cell division happening, and so those aren't going to be able to grow and heal together and form your graft union. So I mentioned before that, grafting, you need a little bit more tools than you need for seed production. Only a few things that you need. So a knife, you want a good sharp knife. Some people use a razor blade. I would rather use a knife. You can also use a grafting tool, and I'll show that in a minute. Grafting tools are really good for people who don't have a lot of experience using a knife to graft. You need something to hold your rootstock and scion together while they heal. So we usually use parafilm, that's like a stretchy plastic. There's different brands of grafting tape. Some people just use rubber bands and wrap it up, but you need something to hold that tightly together. And what do you need to graft successfully? You need them to be compatible, at least the same genus, preferably the same species. So like I said, we graft pawpaw onto pawpaw seedlings. If it's the same genus, so you might have seen fruit cocktail trees advertised sometimes that are cherry and plum and peach and nectarine. Those are all the same genus, so they're all prunus, even though they're different fruits. So the same genus can be grafted together, but again, you couldn't graft pawpaw onto a peach tree or a plum tree. And again, you need good contact with that cambium so that cell division will take place and it will heal together. You want it wrapped tightly, so there's kind of pressure on it to help it heal, and it's sealed up so it doesn't dry out. Warm temperatures, so grafting works best when plants are actively growing and the temperatures are pretty warm. And of course, you only want to propagate healthy plants. So for your rootstock and your scion both, make sure that you choose healthy, disease-free plants. So the first step is to collect the wood that you're wanting to graft with, and this is going to be your scion. So this is going to be the top part of your tree that you're producing. So we collect the scion wood at the end of winter, beginning of spring, when trees are still dormant, but after kind of the coldest part of winter is over. So usually February, early March, you can still collect this. And again, this is taken just from healthy trees of the variety that you want to propagate. And 1-year-old wood, usually about the diameter of a pencil or a little bit smaller, with good vegetative buds. So pawpaw buds, the vegetative buds are pointy and the flower buds are round, so that's how you can differentiate them. And so this is not the time of year that we want to graft yet though, so we're collecting it in February, then you want to store it in the refrigerator. And keep it a little bit moist. Sometimes we'll just put like a few drops of water in the bag. You can put like a damp paper towel in a sealed plastic bag in the refrigerator to kind of keep the humidity or moisture up until we're ready to graft. So we're ready to graft. May is the best time to graft. I think I'll have that on a later slide. But around that time, you want to select your rootstock. So again, this is usually 2-year-old seedlings that are big enough to graft onto. Those can be in pots, or they can be trees already out in the field. And you can use older trees for bark inlay grafting, and I'll talk about that in a minute. That's just a different grafting method where you can use larger, older trees. So except bark inlay is the exception. Otherwise, you ideally want your rootstock to be around the same diameter as the scion, so you can fit them together well. And you want them to be actively growing, bark slipping, about the point where they have 1 to 2 inch long leaves. Okay, there. So then, when do we graft? Early May is the best time in Kentucky. So you want them to be, again, actively growing, about 1 to 2 inch long leaves. And you want to, again, you've got to match up that cambium on at least one side. So if you've got a size discrepancy between your scion and your rootstock, you want them to be lined up on one side so those can heal together. If you put it in the middle, then the cambium's not going to be in good contact to grow together. Again, you want a sharp knife is very important because you want to make a clean cut. You want to wrap it well, nice and tight, so there's pressure on that. And one of the most important things with grafting is make sure you label it so you keep track of what variety you grafted. And you'll usually see the buds start to expand in just 1 to 2 weeks, but it takes about a month and a half for it to heal completely. So you want to be careful with it in the meantime. If you're watering and you kind of hit the tree that you grafted with your watering wand, it can knock the scion off. And another thing, so the rootstock, the seedling that you grafted onto, will keep trying to grow leaves below where you did the budding or the grafting, and you want to rub those off because those will kind of compete for resources with the scion. So these are some methods that we use to graft pawpaws. I mentioned the grafting tool, so this is really good for people who have not grafted before, or you're not as comfortable using a knife. So this is a tool that will basically make the cut for you. And the, I don't know if it's, yeah, oh, there it is. So this tool makes a little bit deeper cut. So you see it makes kind of a V-shaped cut. So you can buy these from a lot of orchard supply, garden supply companies just on Amazon. So I would look for one like the bottom photo that makes more of a deep V-shaped cut. The one on top makes kind of a shallow U-shaped cut that doesn't give you as much contact or stability. So you put this tool, slide the stem of your rootstock into the tool. It's got this V-shaped blade. You just squeeze it, and it makes that V-shaped cut for you, nice and clean. You may need to sharpen the blades of it, make sure it's nice and sharp. Then you just take the tool, you make that same cut on your piece of scion that you're propagating, and again, it makes the V-shaped cut, makes a corresponding cut. They fit together just like puzzle pieces, so you just put them together, and again, wrap that up with parafilm or something to hold that tight and seal it up, and that will heal together. The shoot of the scion will grow out, and that will be your new tree. So chip budding is a method of grafting where you just cut one bud off instead of cutting a whole stick off to propagate. So you're cutting a single bud off in kind of a shield shape, and then you make a corresponding cut on the stem of your rootstock. And again, just fit that right in there like a puzzle piece, wrap it up, just put one layer of the parafilm over the bud so it can grow out easily. That will grow out, and chip buds, when they're first performed, it looks like a shoot kind of growing at an angle out of the side of the trunk. As time goes on, that will straighten up, so you'll cut off the top of the rootstock right above the chip bud after that breaks and has a few leaves on it. That will straighten up, and after a few years you can't even tell that it was done. When you go on the orchard tour, all of the trees in the orchard out there were chip budded, and now they look like completely straight trees. You see a little scar where it was budded is it. Whip and tongue grafting is another good method of grafting pawpaw. So with this, you basically take a knife and you make a slanted cut on your rootstock and your scion and make a little flap on that slant. And those fit together. There's a lot of contact between the cambium because you've got that flap, so there's a lot of surface area and contact. So this is a very successful method for grafting too. And again, just fit them together, just like puzzle pieces, wrap them up tightly, and that will grow and be your new tree. But I wanted to mention bark inlay grafting. So this is a little bit different. So this is a way that you can graft larger, more mature trees. So if you have a pawpaw seedling or you have wild trees and you don't think the fruit is very good on them, this is a way that you can do something called top working, which is where you cut that tree down and graft something onto it and basically change it over into a new variety. So you cut it back. This works best on trees that are about 2 inches in diameter. On really large trees, it won't heal up quite as well. But about 2-inch diameter is a good size. You cut this to kind of a slanted stump, and you make a flap on the side, 2 vertical lines on the side, and peel that back. And your piece of scion, you cut kind of a pointed end on it and just slide it down into that flap on the side of the trunk of your rootstock. And that will heal up. It grows very quickly because you're grafting it onto a mature root system, a large root system. And so you can see here, if I can control that, how you can see the old stump and how that scion is starting to heal over the stump. And ideally, if they're small enough, that will eventually heal completely and envelop the old stump so that's not exposed anymore. One thing about these, they do have to be staked, so they're sensitive to wind damage because you've got this little scion sticking out of the trunk for a few years until it heals completely. We lost a lot of these to a windstorm, but we had a lot of success, had probably 80% success grafting, and then we had 60-mile-an-hour winds that came straight through the orchard, and it broke probably 3/4 of them. So they definitely need to be staked. But otherwise, this is a good method to graft trees that are larger or change, top working to change it over to a new variety. So I wanted to mention, I know a lot of people have not grafted before, not familiar with it. So if you'd like to learn how to do that, we have a grafting workshop here, right here in this building, and then we'll go outside. There. Well, no. Okay. So in early May, it used to always be the first Friday of May. Last year we ended up having it on Thursday. So anyway, sometime the first week of May is when we generally have our grafting workshop here at the farm. If you follow on Eventbrite, because we have to have tickets for it, if you follow Kentucky State University Land Grant Program on Eventbrite, tickets will be there, or if you follow KSU Pawpaw on Facebook, we will post it on there ahead of time. And tickets, usually, it's free of charge, but we have to have tickets because we have to limit the number of people that come because we're limited by the number of tools and trees that we have because it's a hands-on workshop where you graft your own trees and get to take some home with you. So it usually sells out. I say sell even though they're free, but anyway, tickets go pretty fast. So keep an eye on that, but we will have that in early May every year if you would like to learn how to graft pawpaw trees and learn more about it. So does anybody have any questions about seed propagation or grafting, either one? I think they're coming around with microphones, but yeah, keep your hand up and they'll come around with a mic for you. We're live streaming, so it's good to have the mic so people can hear questions. Okay, yes, sorry.
So we went to the Ohio Pawpaw Festival, and they have the growers selling the seedlings, and we were told that you can't tell if it's a female or a male tree, so we wouldn't know if we planted if we'll get fruit or not. Is that still?
So pawpaw, they're not separate male and female trees with pawpaw, so you don't need to worry about that. You do need to for cross-pollination, like Dr. Pomper mentioned, but there's not separate male and female trees for pawpaw. Pawpaws have male and female parts on the same tree in the same flower, so they have perfect flowers. So yeah, there's not male and female trees, you just need two to cross-pollinate. Yeah, so, and any two of your seeds should be able to pollinate each other. So.
When you graft, do you have to remove all the leaves on the seedling below the graft and keep them off?
Yes, so when you graft, you want to remove all the leaves that are below the graft. The only caveat, so when we do chip budding, we'll usually leave part of the top there to kind of support it. So we'll cut it back, but we'll leave, and this is just with chip budding, so other methods you would be cutting it all back. But leave, 3 or 4 leaves when you chip bud and wait until that bud breaks and has grown a few leaves of its own, and then cut the rest of the top off right above the chip bud. But yeah, on the stem, the trunk of the rootstock, yeah, you want to remove all the leaves that try to break below the graft union or below the bud. Yes, yeah, and keep them off. And that's partly it's taking resources from the shoot that's trying to grow from the graft and trying to heal, but then also you don't want confusion between what was the rootstock and what was the scion. If you let a branch of the rootstock grow, then eventually, if you let it go and then a few years, you don't know which was the shoot from the rootstock and which was the shoot from the scion. So, yes.
So I have a more than 10-year-old tree that ended up with a bark inclusion. It had 2 central leaders, and it's now like, 6 inches around, and it's splitting like a 2-foot long split. Would my best course of action be to cut it at ground level and top work a new shoot, save just 1 shoot? Because it would be too much for a graft to seal back over.
Yeah, so is each branch, so you said 6-inch diameter, but that's the main trunk, so each shoot would be more like 2 to 3 inch diameter?
Well, it's splitting at about eye level down to about here, and it's starting to go like this, and the bark inclusion is that whole gap. So if I were to cut it below the bark inclusion, that'd be like 3 feet above the ground, where it's, that big around.
That's really too big, ideally, to bark inlay graft. Sometimes people will do multiple bark inlays around, instead of just doing 1, they'll do like 3 around the edge of the trunk, and that will grow over, but really that's bigger diameter than we recommend doing bark. You could do that if it ends up split. I mean, you can just leave it until it splits. You can try to secure it, try to kind of stake it, depending on how it is, stake it to try to keep it from splitting further. But then, yeah, you can graft onto root suckers. So yeah, if you have a tree that gets blown down in the wind or splits or dies and root suckers come up, then you can graft onto root suckers, yes.
How far apart do you plant the trees so that you get great pollination?
Jeremy will probably mention this in orchard management, but 8 to 10 feet is the recommended distance between planting trees. So yeah, 8 to 10 feet.
Hey Sheri, would you care to go into a little more detail about chip budding regarding what time of year and whether we use dormant scions, etc.?
Yes, so chip budding, same with the other grafting methods. So you collect the scionwood when it's dormant, so February or March when it's still dormant, and store it in the refrigerator. And then you do the chip budding or grafting in May when the rootstock is actively growing. So just store the scionwood dormant in the fridge until the plant's actively growing, has 1 to 2 inch long leaves. And like I said, usually early to mid-May is the best time. And then you get your scionwood out of the refrigerator and graft that onto the rootstock that's growing. Is that great? Yes.
About transplanting sprouts from another pawpaw tree.
Transplanting sprouts like the root suckers. That is hard to do because, pawpaw sends up a lot of root suckers, and they a lot of times don't have a lot of root systems of their own, so it can be hard to dig them. We haven't experimented with this, but what I've heard kind of anecdotally other people say is, so a root sucker, you can cut around it with a shovel, and that kind of partially severs the runner root, and just leave it there for another year, and then the next year in the spring, dig that and transplant it, and it won't have as much transplant shock. If it's a seedling that you're trying to transplant, then just dig as deep as you can because they have a taproot and you want to get as much of the root as you can. And I wouldn't try to dig and transplant anything that was over like 3 feet tall, is going to go through too much transplant shock. But a small seedling, if you dig deep and get as much of the roots as you can.
If you've only got one tree, can you graft varieties or different grafts onto that one tree to get cross-pollination?
Yes, so a single tree, you can graft, a single branch of it. So yes, you could graft multiple varieties on different branches of the tree to have several varieties on one tree. They do kind of want to, so if you're trying to do it all at one time, pawpaw is very strongly apically dominant, which basically means it wants like one shoot growing upward. So if you do like multiple grafts on the trunk, like multiple chip buds on the trunk at once, a lot of times only one of them will want to grow. But yeah, if you have branches, you can do like the bark inlay or another grafting method on the individual branches to have, multiple varieties per tree. Yes.
So next year, if I plan on grafting on the seedlings that grew this year, do I need to wait a duration of time for those grafts, or do I plant them after I graft?
So pawpaws go through some transplant shock when they're planted, so it's not ideal to graft it and plant it in the same year. Usually you'd want to, if it's in a pot, graft it this year and then not plant it until the following year to give it kind of time to heal up and grow. Was there a question over here?
Can I go ahead and mow off the seedlings or the runners that are coming up?
Yes, that's what we do. So all the root suckers that Pawpaw wants to send up, we just mow them or we
So there's
eat
no
them down.
benefit whatsoever to them?
Yeah, so we just cut the root suckers down. Yeah.
What age or what size of the seedlings do I transplant into the ground?
Transplanting seedlings, you want them to be over 18 inches tall, ideally, because that's the point where they can be in full sun. So anywhere from there, up to 3 feet or so. People want large trees, but actually with Pawpaw, a little bit smaller is better because their taproot and transplant shock that they go through, you don't necessarily want like an 8-foot tall bald and burlap pawpaw tree would not transplant well. So anything, usually it ends up being about 2 years old, so over 18 inches tall is a good size to transplant. Any other questions? I think I see one more. I think, yeah, probably have time for one.
You talked about the fruit being different shapes. Are the seeds different shapes? Or include the variety? Like, does one variety have a skin seed versus a...
That's a good question. He asked, since the fruit are different shapes or the seeds different shapes. The seeds are different shapes and different varieties. Some of them do tend to have rounder seeds than others, although I couldn't list off the top of my head which ones have rounder seeds, but certain varieties do tend to have a little bit rounder seeds than others. But you'll see variation even just within the fruit or within the same variety. You'll see some big flat seeds and some smaller round seeds, but I think some of them do tend to have a little rounder seeds. So trees that are just growing on your farm, they're probably just wild type. They're just unnamed seedlings, so they wouldn't be a cultivar. So cultivars are something that we've grafted and that you've either grafted yourself or you purchased from a nursery. So the wild trees are not like a named variety. They're just kind of an unnamed seedling. I think we got one more question, and then it's probably time to move on. What do we use for our rootstock? Any pawpaw seedling. So it could be, a wild seedling or seed that you've saved from a fruit, but like I said, it needs to be pawpaw, so it can't be a different tree species or genus, but any pawpaw seedling is fine. So, all right, well, thank you all. I think we'll move on to the next presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Crabtree. Our next speaker will be Mr. Jeremy Lowe, and his topic will be orchard management.
All right, good afternoon, I guess still morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about orchard management. So I've got a bunch of stuff to go through, so I'm probably not going to spend a lot on each specific one. If we don't have questions or time for all the questions before lunch, I'm giving the orchard tour after lunch. That's a lot more laid back, and so you're welcome to ask me. Probably a lot of that will just be kind of question and answer, or you can kind of find me afterwards. So for site selection, you want to avoid air pockets or air drainage. So we talked about, pawpaw trying to miss the spring frost. If you look at that photo, you can see there's kind of a slope that goes down. So cold air will act a lot like water, and so that cold air will pool at the bottom and it will run down to the lower areas. So, sometimes in like fall evenings, if you walk down in a valley, it's a lot cooler down there. And so we've actually seen this here at our farm where we have freeze events, and there'll literally be a line on the trees where below that everything is frozen and killed, and above that it's fine, and that's where that cold air pooled up to. And so you want to avoid trying to plant them in those low areas where there can be frost pockets. Pawpaw, it prefers a deep, fertile, well-drained soil. It is a forest understory tree, but it will tolerate a lot of soils. Real heavy clay it doesn't like a bunch, but we've got a lot of clay soil out here, and they do okay in. Especially if you're growing organically, you want to get your weeds under control before you plant. Pawpaw, while it's a forest understory tree, you think it would compete, it competes with light in that forest. But if there's weeds around out, it doesn't compete very well with those weeds. You will need a water source for irrigation, especially when you've just planted them the first couple of years. I would recommend irrigation for as long as you have the trees. And then again, we talked about pawpaw is a forest understory tree, and they produce best out in full sun. But they do need a little bit of shade in the beginning. But once you go to plant your orchards and the trees are big enough, they produce the most fruit out in full sun. So if you're going into a new area, I would always recommend that you have a soil analysis done. Some of the soil amendments you might need to put in are difficult or impossible to incorporate after the trees are in. Some of that stuff, it's not like fertilizer you just put down on top. Some of it you have to till into the soil. So if you're doing that, you need to get that in before you've planted the trees. Again, you want to remove weeds prior to planting, especially if you're growing organically. What we usually do is we'll mark our rows out. We'll go through with a tiller or cultivator to kind of get the soil prepared. You can also go through with a subsoiler if you want to cultivate a little bit deeper. So when you're picking your site, you need to know what's above and below your site. To use an example, at my house, I have a little stream in my backyard that has a real high, vertical bank with erosion, and so I put a couple pawpaw trees back there just to help hold the creek bank. There's also a set of power lines back there. Now, the trees will never get tall enough to get in those power lines, but the power company, every time they get just big enough where they get fruit on them, they go through and cut them off about 4 inches off the ground. Okay? So it's annoying for me, but if you are, have an orchard or something, that's something serious. This is actually out at our farm where we were trying to replace a hydrant and they guessed wrong which side the water line was on. That's kind of a problem. However, if that was a buried electrical cable or a buried gas line and you hit that, that can be much more serious and life-threatening. And so if you don't know what's above or under your site, I would recommend you call and have them flag out the utilities. Also, shallow soil is another thing. We've talked a lot about pawpaw being deeply taprooted. Kentucky has a lot of shallow soil with limestone floaters. Here at our farm, we've got a bunch of limestone floaters. So there's areas in some of our orchards where there's nothing for 50 foot in the row. And you're like, well, why did they not have trees there? Well, it's because there's this much soil and then there's rock. And that's just not enough soil for the trees to survive on with their taproots. So in Kentucky, we recommend planting in the spring or fall. We used not to recommend fall planting. We've since done some studies and looked at that and found that they do well with fall planting. You can do it so fall, I'm talking about November or so is when we had tried planting, or you can plant early spring like March when the trees are dormant. If the trees have leafed out, you want to wait until early May to plant them because you want that chance of frost to be passed. And so here in our area of Kentucky, last week of April, first week of May is generally our last killing frost. And if you're putting trees out and they're leafed out, and they get a frost and it burns them back, and then they're going through transplant shock, and now they're trying to grow new leaves too, and so that's just added stress on them. So when you plant, depending on how many trees you're planting, you can either use a shovel, like kind of the scissor style post hole digger, or an auger power drill. So normally when we're doing it, we've either got a tractor mounted auger, or we're using one of those power drills to do it. So again, especially if your soil is a heavy clay soil, you don't want to plant when the soil is too wet, especially with those augers, because what will happen, it'll kind of glaze the inside of that soil. That can then kind of dry, and you get almost like a pot effect. And so it'll actually can be kind of difficult for the tree roots to get out through that barrier into the soil, and they almost kind of stay pot bound inside that hole. And so you don't want to plant when the soil's really, really wet. And then again, don't forget your irrigation. So generally for spacing, we recommend 8 to 10 foot spacing. So the orchard we're going to look at this afternoon, the trees are on 8 foot spacing. You will notice that the trees will grow into each other at that spacing. And so if that's something you want to avoid, you can put them a little bit farther apart. One of our old orchards we put on a 6 foot spacing, and I think that's a little bit close for them to be together. So you don't want to put them farther than 30 foot apart. Again, they're flying beetle pollinated. And so if you've got the trees really far apart, you won't get the cross-pollination like you would get with something that's pollinated with honeybees. So you can get about 295 trees per acre. and the trees seldom grow taller than 25 foot. When we go out to the orchard tour, there's a tree out there that I have never pruned or topped back, and so I usually kind of point that out to show you like how big they can get. They actually tend to stay a little shorter out in full sun than they do in the forest understory because they're not up fighting to get that light, and so they will tend to be a little bit shorter out in full sun. They also have a very different shape to them. You know, in the understory they're very long and skinny. Out here they're more of a pyramidal shape. So again, we talked some about weed control, and so it's important to manage your weeds because those weeds will be competing for resources. So they can, you know, water, nutrients, that sort of thing, and so that's why it's important to control weeds. So with Pawpaw, we'll talk about several different methods of weed control you can use. We'll talk about straw or hay or wood chips. We'll talk about mechanical cultivation, flame cultivation, trimmers, and herbicide. And so as an example here, you can see we've got a peach tree that we have mulched and a peach tree that's just competing with the grasses, and you can see how much happier the peach tree looks that's got the mulch around it because it's not going through all that competition for its resources. So the first method we'll talk about is hay, straw, or wood chip mulch. So you can either do this with like, you know, straw, like square bales. If you're gonna use like the big round bales, you know, you need special equipment to roll those out. That's something you'll need to reapply every year. You know, that will kind of break down and add some organic content to your soil, which is nice. I will caution that, you know, hay quality kind of matters. They gave us some hay here one year that they didn't want to feed to the goats because it wasn't good enough. And that probably should have been a warning that it was, you know, that it wasn't good. And so we spread that out on our orchard, and essentially what we did was we put a bunch of weed seeds down. It was essentially like baled weeds, and so that almost created more problems than it solved. If you're going to use wood chips, that will kind of tie up some nitrogen, so you might need to fertilize a little bit heavier. Again, that will break down and add organic content to your soil. You don't want to use the same species of chips, so you would not want to put pawpaw chips around your pawpaw tree. So that can help serve as a disease reservoir and disease amplification. That's actually kind of how they got mad cow disease, was doing that sort of thing. And this is a chemical-free thing. I know a lot of pawpaw people, if they're not full organic, they're at least sustainably focused. And so a lot of times they're interested in like chemical-free methods. So this is a method that you're not applying any kind of chemical herbicides. So flame cultivation, this is you're using a torch and you're to kill weeds, and you're not trying to scorched earth it and burn it all to the ground. You're just kind of trying to rupture those cells, and that will then cause the weed to wilt. And so as you continue to do that, you'll kind of exhaust the root reserves in those weeds. Again, you're not using a chemical herbicide that you're putting down for this. There's a couple different models. There are tractor models that, you know, for doing big things. For what we would normally use is kind of up in the upper right is like the little small, kind of like backpack style flamer. And so this is kind of what it looks like as you're going around the tree. That actually almost is a little heavy flaming, but that's kind of what you're trying to do is go around and just rupture those cells, not completely burn it to the ground. So this is an example of flaming that was done. You can see it's August 18th. This is about a week afterwards. And so you can see you're getting some regrowth there. What I would point out is if you look kind of right there, you can see a bunch of dead leaves. So Dr. Pomper was the one that did the flaming. I can promise you Dr. Pomper didn't accidentally like flame halfway up the tree with this. So what happened is hot air rises. You've all seen hot air balloons. Those pawpaw trees have a dense canopy there. All that hot air rose up through that canopy, and it was dense enough that it got trapped, and it got hot enough that it actually killed those leaves and caused them to drop. So we have never had good luck with flaming here. We have burned down a blackberry planting to the ground with it. We've killed a bunch of baby grafted pawpaw trees with it. I've gone through and flamed, and like 2 days later, it looked like I hadn't done anything. And so I've not had good experience with flaming. I don't necessarily recommend it. You are also burning a fossil fuel, you know, and so you're releasing carbon dioxide and nitrogen into the air, you know, the stuff that you're burning on the ground. So that's also CO2 coming into the air, but you're not spraying a chemical per se. So the next one is string trimmer. So this is one that we use a lot here, mainly early in the spring and then now during harvest season. That can be labor intensive. You know, I'm not 20 years old anymore. I definitely know when I strap a weed eater on and go out and weed eat for 4 or 5 hours. You also need to be careful about injuring your trees. So in the kind of the nursery business, they talk about something called mower blight. And that's when somebody has gone by with the mower and hit a trunk and knocked the bark off of it, and then either that girdles it or it gets a disease and dies. There's also trimmer blight. Sheri and I have gone to more than one grower visit where they're like, our trees are really like declining, we don't know what's going on. And we'll go up there and we'll look at them and be like, well, who's doing your weed control? Like, oh, we have the jail inmates come out and do it for us for free. It's really convenient. I was like, well, your jail inmates girdled your tree with the string trimmer when they went around it. So, and that will kill it. And so that's something, you know, trees this size, if you tap them a little bit, it's probably not, you know, a tree death experience. If you've got little trees that are like pencil diameter, 3/8, that could easily kill the tree, snap it off. So it's something you need to be careful with. What we actually do a lot is we'll do a little circle by hand around the trees before we go through with the string trimmer, just to try to prevent hitting those little trees like that. So now we'll talk about herbicide. So we use a combination of herbicide and string trimming and manual like hoeing. So we use glyphosate. So we've been told that if it's labeled for cherimoya, which is a tropical pawpaw relative, that's close enough to pawpaw, because it's such a small crop, you're not going to have, you know, a lot of stuff labeled for pawpaw. So this can provide you with long-lasting control, and so, you know, this is something you put down, you know, every couple weeks. It's a lower labor input, so again, you do always want to follow label directions on this. So this isn't chemical-free, so for some people, you know, they don't like this because you're applying a chemical. It's also possible to damage trees this way. So you see the stunted kind of wrinkled leaves there, that's herbicide damage. So we finally figured out what was happening was when they were going through and spraying the trees, they hadn't removed the root suckers. Those root suckers were transporting that glyphosate down into the root system and back up the parent tree. And so actually, and you can see like that's gone pretty far up the tree there. And so what we do now is we will go through and remove the root suckers before we spray. Now, if you look in the instructions for most of these chemicals, you will see that they advertise like a method to kill trees is you cut the stump and apply it to the stump. And so you want to remove the root suckers a day or two ahead of time to let that kind of callus and harden over instead of doing it like on the freshly cut ones. So another possible issue you can have is erosion. So when you are doing control like that, you know, you're removing the weeds, but there's also roots that kind of help hold the soil in place. And so this is actually out in one of our orchards on a hill. We had a really, really heavy rain event, and we had some erosion. So you also want to pay attention to what your harvest intervals are. So if the harvest interval is 2 weeks, you don't want to be going out 2 days before and spraying. And so that's another thing to keep in mind. So other methods that we'll use are like mow and blow, where you're kind of blowing the grass clippings like into a specific area. Newspaper mulch, hoeing again, which we use. Landscape fabric is something else we've tried. I don't recommend. Our experience is it does not take very long before you get enough like organic matter on top of the landscape fabric that weeds will sprout and they can get their roots through it. And so then when you're trying to pull the weeds out, you're ripping the landscape fabric up too. So that's something we have tried. I don't like, you know, it may work okay with you. As far as like fertilization and irrigation, so especially when the trees are young, they need irrigation. What we do is we have 1 gallon per hour trickle emitters. We'll have 2 of them per tree. And so a tree will need about 240 gallons per year. So we fertilize, mainly what we do is we do fertilizer in the spring. So we'll use urea about February, March. You can also go through with a water-soluble fertilizer 2 or 3 times a year. Once you get to about August, you want to stop fertilizing because that fertilizing invigorates the trees and you want them to start shutting down when it gets that late in the year. So you don't really want to fertilize much past August this time of year. And so for new trees, you can do about 1 ounce of nitrogen a year. Once they get bigger, you can do 3 to 4 ounces. So for pruning basics, you know, there's minimally prune methods and there's central leader prune methods. So you always want to remove competing main stems. So this is kind of like a trifecta of like everything you don't want to see in a pawpaw tree, and this is one of our trees, so I'm comfortable saying that. So you've got competing main stems, you've got crossing limbs, you've got rubbing limbs, and narrow crotch angles. So the narrow crotch angles are a weaker junction. That's one of the reasons like Bradford pear trees don't take wind very well. If you've got a crotch angle like this, that's not as strong as one that's like that. And so pawpaw is a soft wood. If you get a big heavy fruit crop on it and you get one of our afternoon late thunderstorms, big winds come through there, you can lose a lot of trees that way. So you always want to prune that out. We normally prune in February, March here in Kentucky. So this is an example of a central leader method. So for that, you're kind of selecting for a central stem. You'd want like scaffold branches that come off. You notice those are close to 90-degree angles, and that's compared to a minimally pruned tree. Okay, so that's when the trees were smaller. Here's when the trees are a little bit bigger. So I can tell you, working with these trees, the central leader trees are much nicer to work with. You know, the minimally pruned trees, it's hard to get under them with the string trimmer. It's hard to get under them to harvest fruit. So once this experiment was over, I actually tried to convert all our trees over to central leader, which is the orchard we'll go take a look at this afternoon. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is winter injury. So this will look like, it looks like a disease, but it's actually a physiological injury. And so what happens is pawpaws are pretty cold hardy. They'll take 20 below, but it takes them a while to build up that hardiness and get acclimated to that. And so it turns out when it warms up, they lose that cold hardiness, and they lose it faster than they get it back. And so you'll have a sunny winter day, that sun will shine on the trunks and on the southwest side, and it will de-harden that strip of the trunk. Well, then the sun goes down and it goes back down to 15 degrees at night. It can't get its cold hardiness back as quickly. And so that strip of cells then will freeze and rupture on that part of the trunk. Now, if it's really bad, it'll just blow the bark off the tree in a day or two. I think 2020, we had a really horrible freeze event and it did that. However, what you will see is you'll get a strip, if not that whole side of the trunk will die. And so, you know, you look at this and you think, oh, my tree's got some kind of disease or something. Now, once it's open, you will get like borers and fungus and stuff go in, but the root cause of that is a physiological thing. It's not a disease that caused it. If you go through our old orchards and look, all the southwest sides of the trunks look a lot like that, and all the north sides look fine. And so we think the reason pawpaw is kind of susceptible to this is it's a forest understory tree. Even in the winter, it's getting a little bit of shading on the trunks from all the other trees in the woods. So we think that's why it's especially susceptible to this. So what we do is we paint the trunks white, and that's just reflecting that sunlight off of them. It has to be latex paint. It can be indoor or outdoor paint. It has to be latex, though. Oil-based will kill the trees. So depending on how thick your paint is, you can dilute it a little bit, and then you just paint the trunks with it. And so we do this once a year. You know, if you've got just a couple trees, you can do it with a paintbrush. I actually have like a trailer with a big like airless sprayer and generator and everything that we do. So we have to do this every year, and so this is something annually you should do. And we start painting them once they get about 2 inches in diameter is when we start painting them. So now I'll switch over to some pests and diseases. And so there's going to be a lot of stuff I'm going to show you. Don't worry, there's not a lot of really bad pawpaw pests. We don't treat for any, so we apply fertilizer and herbicide is the only treating that we do. And so some of these I've not even ever seen in our orchards. So the first one is called a stinging rose caterpillar. I've never actually seen this. So this was from Ron Powell's place. His trees kind of butt up against the woods, and so he got some interesting pests in. So in nature, anytime there's something really like bright yellow or red that's trying to get your attention, that usually means you shouldn't mess with it. And so these caterpillars actually do have stinging hairs on them. So if you're going to remove them, you know, be careful with that. You can see the moth is actually a fairly pretty moth as well. So this is pawpaw leaf roller. I have never seen these. They will roll the leaf up in a little tube, and then that larva will feed into them. But again, this is something that I've never seen. It wouldn't surprise me if you've never seen it. The next one is pawpaw sphinx. So you're probably looking at that and thinking, well, that's a tomato hornworm. It's actually a relative to it. And so those are both sphinx moths. So I will see maybe 1 or 2 of these a year out in our orchards out there. So this isn't something, again, that I would anticipate being a problem for you. You know, they are pretty big. If you've ever seen a tomato hornworm, they can get pretty big. The moths look a lot like a tomato hornworm as well. So the next one is zebra swallowtail. And so this is, you know, some people would say this isn't a pest. A lot of people, you know, butterfly gardens often incorporate pawpaw to bring in zebra swallowtail. It is the exclusive host for pawpaw. So when you've got mature trees, it will not be a problem. And so you can see the adult there. We may see some flying around out in the orchard tour. You can see a caterpillar there in the center. They will actually go through, they kind of change colors as they molt and grow, and then the chrysalis there. And so there's another caterpillar at a different instar stage, and so you can see it's like a greenish color. So that's the damage they do. They tend to like to lay on small trees with young foliage, and they can do some significant damage to those. They can defoliate those. What I do, honestly, if I see them where I don't want them, I pick them off and put them on a different tree. They do, like all swallowtail caterpillars, have little like fleshy orange horns. They'll shoot out of their heads and rear back to like put stinky stuff on your fingers. Pawpaw zebra swallowtails tend to be pretty laid back about it, whereas like black swallowtails, kind of like peace was never an option with them. Like if you've ever pulled them off, like they like to get on dill and parsley and that kind of stuff. Like they don't hesitate to like shoot the horns out at you. So Japanese beetles, Japanese beetles love everything. So they will feed on pawpaw. It's not one of their preferred plants. It's not like grapes. And so we'll see some feeding damage every year. It's not really bad. They kind of do that like netted damage there you can see in the center. So now we're starting to get into stuff that can be serious. So this is Asian ambrosia beetle, which you can see is like a little tiny beetle, okay? So what it does is it bores galleries into the trunks of trees. And when that's going on, you'll sometimes see, like on the left, those like they call them toothpicks sticking out. That's the like shavings from them boring coming out. So they then bring a fusarium fungus in there, and that grows in the tree, and then their larvae eat that fungus. Well, that fungus will plug the vascular system on the plant, and that's what causes the issue. And so they sometimes call that blue stain disease. You can see in the center picture some kind of like bluish coloration. So the middle and the left are actually American persimmons trees that were out at our farm here. The one on the right is pawpaw. If you get this, your only option is to cut the tree down and destroy it. Like you can't save it. And so the best way to avoid this is to not have a lot of dead wood, like wood piles laying around your orchards. So that's the best way to avoid having that. And for like 2020 seemed like that was a really bad year. Like that's when we had this. I know Sheri got a lot of calls about people that had this in their orchard. So the next one is a Semina webworm. I have actually never seen this. Clifford England's here. He's one of our nursery guys. He has this at his place. I am glad we have never seen this because this can be pretty bad as well. So they're, especially when they're young, they're like a communal, like tent caterpillar kind of thing. And they make these clusters of leaves that they bunch together and cover with silk. And you can see they're like a red and black caterpillar. As they get bigger, they get an inch or two long. And so you can see the left picture, there's like a little silk tube that it's got to run through. And then on the right there, you can see where I've got one out and got it in my hand. And that's about full size for them. The moth is just kind of a nondescript brown looking moth. So now the issue lies when you have a bad infestation. So actually I got these from Neil Peterson. So you can see those trees are pretty much defoliated. They've eaten almost everything off of them. So they will eat this fruit. I have seen pictures where they ate the bark off of trees that were like 2 inches around. So they can be a serious problem. Again, I've never seen them there, but it is something that if you get them, they can cause issues. If it's just one or two little batches of them, you might just be able to prune that off and get rid of them, but that is something that can be a concern. The next one is pawpaw peduncle borer. So the peduncle is the stem that connects the fruit to the tree or the flower to the tree. And so peduncle borers are little moths, and they always said, the caterpillars feed on that peduncle. And we would see like some flower death in the spring. Normally it's not bad enough where you're going to lose all your flowers or anything. But we would also see fruit that had what they call frass coming out of them, which is bug poop, the scientific name for bug poop. And so we're like, we got something in there that's boring in these fruit. So we cut some of those out and we found this little bitty larva. And we're like, okay, what is this? So we put some in a container, some fruit that were infested. You can see there we've had some pupa emerge. And so this is what came out of them, or these little moths, like gray moths with a coppery border on the wings. So here's some sitting on a quarter. So again, these are not very big. We had these sent off to be identified. They are peduncle borer, and so they had not previously been reported in the fruit, and so that was a new scientific discovery that they will get in the fruit. The fruit infestation rate is like 3%, and so again, it's not something you're going to lose tons of fruit to. Probably the more serious thing they can do is they will also bore into the stems we've discovered. So if you have a small tree and they get in there, they can do enough damage to kill the tree. And so you can see on the left there, there's some, where some have emerged. In the center, there's some galleries, and then on the right, you can see a gallery there, and you probably can't really see it in the photo, but at the very bottom, you can actually see the pupa there on the bottom right corner. So probably the most common thing we see is this fungal spot. And so that can get on the leaves and fruit. So when it's on the leaves, it starts off as a black spot, and then it will turn tan, and then eventually that tan will drop out. And so they call that bullseyeing. And so this picture here is kind of when it's in the middle stage. The picture on the left is when they're in the younger stage, and so it's just a black spot with that border. And then on the picture on the right, you can see where that spot has dropped out. So the issue more is that you can get it on the fruit. You can see that you get black spots on it. Sometimes it can cover the fruit. The issue is that when it gets on the fruit, it keeps the epidermis from expanding. So when the fruit tries to expand, it will crack. And so once that fruit has cracked, now it's open to have bacteria, diseases, insects, other things come in. And so that's the issue with it. We've had some students look at doing some experiments with trying to control that. Right now, we're not treating for anything. The year to year, it varies on how bad it is with how wet it is. Actually, like last year, it was really bad. This year, it's not been bad at all. So to move up to a little bit bigger pests, so raccoons and possums absolutely love pawpaws. So my dad has an ongoing war at his house, like trying to keep the raccoons out of his pawpaw tree. He usually loses. I think he got 2 fruit this year. At my house, one year, like I actually had fruit, and I was like, oh, it's gonna be ready tomorrow, and I walked out there. There's no fruit and muddy footprints up my trunk. And so I was like, oh, they got me. So they will eat fruit off the ground or out of the trees. We've got enough trees here that they just can't get it all, but they will always pick like the biggest, nicest fruit and just go bite it and then not eat it, just enough so we can't use it. So some other 4-legged pests we have are white-tailed deer. So they very rarely will eat pawpaw. They don't really want to eat it. Like Sheri said, they've got acetogenins in them, or Dr. Pomper said, that's kind of bitter. So they don't like to eat it. What they love to do is rub their antlers on them. And so we have a huge problem with that here at the farm, with them rubbing their antlers on it. And so if you've got a few trees, you can build a cage around them here. And we've got 1,500 trees, that's a little bit more difficult for us. So what I always tell people is the best control method I know is having some good venison recipes and just have some people come out and take care of that problem for you. So the last pest that we probably have more than other people, we have the 2-legged pest. I think I saw some 2-legged pests out in the orchard this morning, actually. So it's kind of fun. Like Sheri and I could tell you lots of stories of somebody come out here on a Saturday and there's somebody out in the orchard like, what you doing out here? Well, just getting some fruit. So that was actually from one of our conferences, the band. So this is my last slide, and I call this kind of the dangers of picking fruit. And so on the left there, you've got a fruit that's got some phyllosticta, it's cracked open. What you may or may not be able to see on the bottom there is a red velvet ant, which is a really pretty insect. I really like them. It's a wingless wasp. It has an extremely painful sting. It's called a cow killer is what they are nicknamed for it. My dad's been stung by one. He confirms it does not feel very good. So, and then the insect on the right is called a cogwheel bug or assassin bug. They're actually beneficial. They eat other pest insects, but they've got that big giant beak on them. If you reach up and grab one of them, they will stick that big giant beak in you. And it does not feel very good. And I had warned one of my students, I was like, you see that up there? I was like, that will bite you if you grab a hold of it. And then 2 weeks later, she's like, yeah, I reached up there and I got one of those and it didn't feel good. So, wasps like to get up if the fruit's cracked. Wasps will get, and bees will get up there. I've had wasp nests in there. So just, when you're kind of in the spirit and you're all excited and happy, hunting for pawpaws, just kind of keep in mind where you're sticking your hands and looking around, because sometimes you might get a little bit of an unpleasant surprise. And so that's the end of my talk. I don't know if we've got time for questions or not, Sheri.
It's 5 after.
So. Okay. I guess we'll take a couple questions if you got. Again, otherwise I'll be doing the orchard tour, so you're welcome to ask me questions out there too. And then after I get done, Edwin's going to come up again and make an announcement after I answer these couple questions.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I have a question about establishing orchards on pasture land or even turf where there isn't maybe a vibrant soil community like there would be just naturally like in the woods.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what y'all have found, plants or even mycorrhizal fungi that pawpaws like to be in community with. Are there species of trees that you would recommend interplanting with, or herbs or, other forest products that y'all alley crop with, or mycorrhizal fungi that you found are helpful to inoculate?
So we haven't looked at any mycorrhizal relationships. I'm sure there are some. Where we've planted out here, most of that was pasture hayland before it went in. As far as like companion plantings, I will mention this isn't a companion planting, but pawpaw is one of the few trees that you can plant around black walnuts and it's fine. So that's a nice thing about it. But as far as where we're going out, they weren't areas that have been forested anytime recently. They've been hay fields for many years, and they seem to establish fine. So any other questions? Can you get her the microphone there, please?
Pawpaws are green like that, and then after it frosts, they turn black, okay? When do you cultivate yours to make this stuff with and things? Do you wait till they turn black, or go ahead and pick them green?
Okay, so she's asking about, like, there's rumors that goes around that you shouldn't really eat pawpaws until they're black. That is absolutely 100% not true. By the time the fruit are black, they're almost always rotten. I think it kind of stems from American persimmons a lot of times. Those aren't ready until there's been a frost, and that can help with the astringency. But for pawpaws, you want to go by when they feel like a soft, ripe peach or avocado. Occasionally, they will be dark, and they're still okay. But normally, when they're all black, they're completely rotten and inedible. And so you don't want to wait for them to get that dark. So I've heard that a lot, but yeah, that's definitely something you don't want to do. So I think we'll have Edwin come up and make an announcement about lunch. And then we'll break for lunch, and then we'll have our program start up after that with some like value added and cooking with pawpaw stuff. Thank you.
Check, check. 1. Hey, hey. 1, 1. Check, check.
comes on. Okay, welcome back from lunch, everyone. I think people are finishing up. Hope everybody enjoyed lunch and hopefully got to try the Pawpaw ice cream. Great. Good. Okay, so before we start our afternoon session, we have somebody here to make an announcement about an exciting event that's going on this Saturday in Louisville, so I'll let him talk about it. This is Tim Coddington.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the lunch. So we're going to have the first annual Louisville Pawpaw Festival. It's this Saturday, free admission. We're having presentations, vendors, fruit, trees, everything you could want out of a Pawpaw Festival. Absolutely free. Come see us. It's at the Louisville Nature Center. Look us up on Facebook. It's easy to find. 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Be there. It'll be a lot of fun. Yes, we will have trees for sale. Lots of vendors with trees. We're going to have a fruit tasting, presentations. It's going to be a blast. It's at the Louisville Nature Center, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturday. It's right next to the Louisville Zoo. All right, anybody have any questions about that? You're all going to be there, right? Yep, okay, great. See you all there.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for letting us know about that. And actually, Dr. Pomper and I will be at the Louisville Pawpaw Fest. We'll have a table, a display table, and bring some fruit to taste, and be giving a presentation at the Louisville Pawpaw Fest. So if you didn't get enough, we'll be there on Saturday too, along with lots of other exciting things going on. So our first presentation of the afternoon is going to be Matt Behrens, and he's going to be demonstrating some Pawpaw value-added products and recipes that we make here. So I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Sheri. Again, she said my name is Matt Behrens. I actually did my my master's here working with Pawpaws, and I've kind of shifted over more to value-added processing, so this kind of hits home for me. Today we are going to be making two things, Pawpaw jam and Pawpaw bread, both of which will be at the tasting after the orchard tour. We're going to start the jam because it takes a little bit to heat up, especially in these little hot plates. So first thing we're going to do is take 6 cups of pulp, pour it right in. And then we're just going to wait for that to heat up, and once it starts simmering, we're going to start adding the sugar. So while that's heating, we're going to go ahead and switch over to the bread. And first step with this is we're going to be combining our butter, which I left back there. I will get that in a second. Eggs and our sugar. So we're going to take 4 eggs. Got a little shell. Yeah. Thank you. We're going to take our 1 cup of melted butter, that's 4 sticks, pour that in, mix in 2 cups of sugar. We have 2 separate recipes for Pawpaw bread on our website. This one's a little easier for me. We did leave out the nuts in case there are allergies for anyone. Okay. Just going to let this start mixing, and while that's mixing together, we are going to go ahead and take our flour. It's going to be 4 cups of flour with 2 teaspoons of baking powder. I'm going to go ahead and add that in and then sift it. Sifting it helps aerate the flour and helps mix that baking soda into it. 2 cups of sugar, and this is 4 cups of flour with 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Now that we've got all of our butter, eggs, and sugar mixed up pretty nicely, it is time to add 2 cups of Pawpaw pulp. And much like a banana bread, this is a dense bread. And we're going to add a tablespoon of lemon juice. This helps with the acidity and also helps, I think, bring the Pawpaw a little bit of light summery taste to it. We're going to mix that back up. While we're giving that a little mix, we're going to go ahead and stir our jam pulp. You can see that there's a couple different colors in this pulp. It was left out in the fridge overnight to thaw out, and do that, it oxidizes a little bit. That gives it that darker color, but it does not affect the flavor. Back to the bread. Now that we got our pulp and lemon juice all nice and incorporated, we are going to start slowly adding our sifted flour and baking powder. Make sure you give it a little time to mix in, otherwise it'll start shooting back at you and coat your entire mixer. Like I mentioned on the website, we include walnuts, I believe, in this recipe. We try to use kind of mild stuff when we're adding it to Pawpaw because it is easily overtaken by other stuff. People have suggested cinnamon, that kind of stuff, but in the past we've tried that, and you really lose the little bit of Pawpaw flavor that comes through when you bake it. Now you can kind of see it's starting to thicken up, look more like a dough. And once it starts looking nice and incorporated, we're going to go ahead and scrape the sides, make sure we get all that extra flour. Give it one last mixing. We'll let that go for a minute, give our jam another stir. Starting to get up to 10. Saw a few bubbles in there. Give it another minute before we start adding to the sugar though. And now that our dough is all nice and mixed up, you can see it's thick but not fully thick. It's still got a lot of moisture content in there. You get that a lot with these fruit breads. Makes them, makes it so you have to cook them a little longer if you don't want them doughy. Originally on our website recipe, we say you can cook it in a full loaf pan for an hour and 15 minutes and it'll start getting pretty burnt around the edges, but that adds flavor. But if you don't have that kind of time or patience, we can use these nice, cute little mini loaf pans that work pretty well. So we're going to start by go ahead and then spraying those down with a little grease so we don't get any sticking. And we're going to use our spatula to start plopping it in. This is very dense, and it doesn't actually rise that much, so you can fill them up pretty much to the top. We were doing them halfway full yesterday, and they still have some room to rise. We had a little extra dough, so this time we're just going to make nice big fluffy loaves. And when they're in a pan this size, we found out that if you cook them at 375, like on the website, they get a little burnt also. So we lowered it to 350 for about 20 minutes. Got them nice and good, which is much more time manageable. Our other Pawpaw bread recipe on our website includes shortening and other stuff that's a little more complicated to use, so I prefer this one. It's easier for people to learn, easy to make, and it's pretty good. And this is very candid for me. I usually make a big mess when I'm in the kitchen. All right, we got a little extra dough, but we're just going to go ahead and leave them like that. Then we're going to pop them in the oven, like I said. We'll probably be doing that while you guys are on the orchard tour. So when you come back in, it should be smelling all nice and delicious. But when it's done, when they're in these little loaves, they come out to be a cute little loaf looking like that. We'll cut into fourths for you to try later today. But right on time, we see our Pawpaw jam starting to bubble. So we're going to start slowly adding sugar, making sure it's nice and incorporated. Pawpaw pulp is very thick, so you do want to keep a good eye on it because it is quick to burn, especially as you start adding the sugar and it gets thicker. You can see here next to it, we're just taking the tops to our cans. We'll be canning these later. You want to make sure you get them warm, help kill off any bacteria, but since there is a rubber seal on them, you want to avoid boiling. So just get them up to a nice quick simmer, then pull them off, and that keeps them nice and safe and helps them seal. So we actually have a lot of, in case anyone didn't hear, we had a question, what other products are made with Pawpaw? Typically we stick to our breads, our jams. There's a company here in town we go to for cakes for special events, ice cream. On our website you'll see recipes for puddings, I believe a gelatin, lots of frostings. Pretty much anything that you use with banana you can substitute with Pawpaw. They're relatively similar in nutritional value as well. We got all the sugar in here, so we're just going to bring this back to a simmer. as well, I'll probably switch to a whisk. While we're bringing this back up to temp, are there any other questions for me at this time? Bread recipe back up? Can you put the bread recipe back up? I had a question, has anyone fermented pawpaws? That is something that we've been trying to do. Frankly, for me, the terminology gets a little confusing about what a pawpaw wine is versus a brandy versus a jack, because they all start to kind of overlap a little bit. Recently, I don't know how many of you have been out to some of our legislative fish fries or anything where we've had Thoroughburn hot sauce. Tried to make a addition of that with pawpaw in it, and let that ferment in it while the peppers are fermenting. You get a little bit of sweetness, but the pawpaw really gets just fermented out of that as well. It's hard to retain the unique flavor of the pawpaw. Not quite fermenting, but going into the distillation business, we have Francine Sloan here, I believe, who makes a delicious pawpaw bourbon jam over at Rising Suns Winery. If any of you are not from the area, it is not too far from here, and I would recommend stopping by for a tasting. We've also partnered with some local places. I don't know how many of you have had a pawpaw wine, but we have partnered with Sig Lusher a couple times here. We take them pawpaw pulp, and the first couple times they made a pawpaw sour. I really liked that one. This last year they made a pawpaw whip, and they will actually be having that at their Oktoberfest on October 7th. That one is also very good. They had that at our Reforest Frankfurt, which is also another opportunity to get pawpaw trees and the like if you guys are in the area. Yes? No, typically though, what we've noticed with pawpaw is pretty much any amount of cooking, you'll start losing it pretty quick. So I'd say if you cook it for more than a couple minutes, you're probably gonna lose a lot of the flavor. But we have been trying to figure out a pasteurization process that helps retain that flavor. It's been a bit difficult to get a pasteurizer that has an instruction manual or one that has any instructional videos online about how to use it. So a little bit of setback there, but we're always trying to learn more about pawpaw and educate people about how to better use it. Yes. I have not, because when I was doing my master's, I had come across the anecdotal evidence online that it makes you sick. When you dry a pawpaw, typically it just concentrates some stuff in there that we do not like, and it'll make you sick. So fruit leather out of the option for it. So we find a lot of better ways to help preserve it and extend its shelf life are to either freeze it and make it into like stuff like an ice cream, or to cook it down, even though you're losing a lot of that flavor. It's not bubbling yet. Wish we had a better setup than this heat pad. We have a beautiful commercial kitchen behind us, but we can't fit 170 or however many you all are here today. That is a commercial kitchen, though, that we allow small farmers to come use when they are trying to move from home-based processing to commercial processing. Some stuff you just will always need a commercial license to sell, so we use that as a training facility to help you get your licensing, help you work out your recipes, get your HACCP plans together, get FDA approved, And then once you get your kitchen built, you can go spread your wings and start making money. I missed the last few words of that. No, they're not selling trees at Oktoberfest, but Sig Lusher is a local brewery who we've partnered with, and they premiered their Pawpaw Whip at our Reforest Frankfurt in April, and that's where you could get trees. So if you're still around next April, if you're from the area, Reforest Frankfurt's a free event. You get a free t-shirt. You can take home a lot of different kinds of trees. We hosted it here this year. It usually changes every year. We've had it at Josephine Sculpture Park, as well as lots of other places around Frankfurt. Starting to get some bubbles. The Pawpaw Bourbon Jam is at Rising Suns Winery. It's based out in Lawrenceburg. They just have the Pawpaw wine. I already forgot the name of the second one.
Yeah, okay, this mic is on. So some other places that make Pawpaw products, Wildside Winery, that's just in Versailles, makes a Pawpaw wine. And I think Dr. Pomper mentioned this. Jephthah Creed Distillery, that's just down the road near Shelbyville, makes a Pawpaw brandy. So those are some other places that you can get Pawpaw products like that. So, and yes, the Rising Sun Winery, even though it's a winery, she does the Pawpaw Bourbon Jam, and that's just right in Lawrenceburg.
All right, now that we're simmering, we're going to go ahead and add some citric acid. You can use this to help lower the pH. And we say to use 2 teaspoons, but I'm going to use 1.5 teaspoons and then do a substitute that rest of it for lemon juice, because I think it helps add a nice light summery taste to it. So the equivalent for 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid, depending on where you look online, varies, but the one that I found that works the best is for every teaspoon of citric acid, it's at 4 tablespoons of lemon juice. So I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of lemon juice to substitute for that 1/2 teaspoon. And we're also going to add our pectin now. This is what helps it turn into a jam, helps thicken it up. And then once we get this incorporated, we're going to bring it back to temp, let it simmer for about 7-8 minutes, and then it is ready to be poured into jars. We have jars in the kitchen right now. In the oven, they've been run through the dishwasher to help sanitize them, and then we just keep them above 200 degrees because you want to hot fill this to make sure you kill any bacteria that could have gotten through the dishwasher. Yes, as Sheri just mentioned, you can reuse the jars themselves and these rings, but because of the rubber layer that is on the lids, that can only seal once properly. So you have to buy new flats every time. Any other questions while we're waiting for temp? Yes. Like during the process? The question was, have we ever had baked items turn pink on us? We have not had an issue with them turning pink. Did you notice pink in the pulp when you were collecting them? And that is very strange. We typically, when we're pulping ours, if we see any remnants of red, pink, we'll scoop that out just because we don't like the color. We like to keep it nice and pure, looking good. But have you had any experience with that?
So I made Pawpaw cookies once. It's been years ago. It was before you were here. Made some Pawpaw cookies that they looked normal. They browned on the outside and broke them open, and they were pink on the inside. And the pulp, the pulp wasn't pink. And I think I read about some other fruit that reacts with either baking soda or baking powder and can turn a pink color. So that was what I assumed happened, was that it was a reaction between whatever the pH of the pulp and the either baking soda or baking powder. So what do you use in the bread, Matt? Do you use baking soda or powder? Powder. So it may have been, if baking powder, they come out fine. It may have been the baking soda then that reacted. I'm not sure if your bread used soda, but yes, I had that happen with cookies, but I didn't know why either, but then later I read about something, and it was a pH thing reacting with the baking soda and turning pink. It was another fruit. So I think that's probably what happened, but that's a good food science question.
Yeah.
But yes, I had that happen with cookies once, and it was weird.
Yeah. Did you happen to use lemon juice in those cookies?
No lemon juice. It was just, I think there were oats and flour and the baking soda and flour. But it was strange. So I think that's why.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you're freezing it, do you add a little lemon juice or something else?
We do not. We like to keep it pure and then add the lemon juice later as it's needed per the recipe. Yeah, we could look into that. Typically, we thought and immediately use it, so we don't give it a lot of time to turn brown. But that could be something to look into. Yeah. Could I get a timer set for 5 minutes? Any other questions while we wait? Have any of you had Pawpaw bread before or tried to make it yourself and had any luck? Nope. New experience for you all today? You bought it before? Was that at a farmer's market? Oh, okay. Yeah. Was that the one in Ohio? Do you have plans on attending the one in Louisville next weekend? Yeah. If I have time, I'll try to make an appearance too. Pretty exciting to have an inaugural festival so close to us. Yeah. It's only the second year of official Pawpaw Day, right? National Pawpaw Day, or is it the third? Oh. Really? Fourth year, okay. Yeah, definitely. And again, with Pawpaw being so thick, you're going to want to be constantly stirring because it is quick to burn at the bottom.
I thought I could mention something.
Yeah. Okay.
After the orchard tour, and so we will have the Pawpaw bread and jam at the tasting, which I think Matt already mentioned. But when you come in, there'll be sheets to evaluate things. So, and I may mention this again before the orchard tour, but you can, evaluate which Pawpaw varieties you like the best. But on the back, there is evaluating the Pawpaw jam and the ice cream also. Like, would you be interested to buy that if it was in a store, and how much would you be willing to pay for it? So, and I don't think I included the bread, but if you went to write at the bottom, would you be interested in purchasing the bread if it was in the stores? Then that would be, or some feedback on the recipe and the flavor of it, then that would be good to have also. It's part of the tasting, so.
So we're approaching 2.5 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and pull our jars from the oven. I mentioned we're keeping them hot. We like to give them just a little bit of time to cool down. If you pour them right into 250-degree jar, then they'll start bubbling up, kind of rising. Could potentially burn your product in the jars. So we're going to go ahead and bring them out and give them just a minute to cool down, or 2 minutes. That is actually something that we've been trying to figure out, what people are willing to pay for them. Have you ever bought them at a farmer's market, seen them? What they're sold for, how much they're sold for at farmer's markets, yeah.
Yeah, the question was how much do fruit sell for, and it varies wildly. So usually around $3 to $4 a pound is what we see. Maybe a little less at farmers markets, some more at retail markets. But I heard at the Ohio Festival that it was selling for, did somebody say $60 a pound or something? $30 a pound. I'm inflating it even more. $30 a pound. Yeah, 60 would have been really crazy, but $30 a pound at the Ohio Festival, because it's a very light year we had, because of the timing of flowering and the spring freezes. Not a lot of people have fruit, so I think that inflated it even higher. But yeah, you go to specialty places like the Ohio Festival, it's $30 a pound. Here at the farmer's market, I would expect more, $3 a pound. When you see it at, so some other places you can purchase fruit other than your local farmer's market is the best place. But there's a few retail stores, so like in Louisville, Rainbow Blossom, that's kind of a natural food store, and in Lexington, Good Foods Market, that's also kind of a local natural food store. Both have had people selling pawpaw fruit in the past. And there it's more in the $4 to $5 per pound range, so yeah.
All right. We got about 30 seconds left on this boil. And that is time for us. Now we're going to transport this into something that is easy to pour. We're going to leave a little in there so I don't keep splattering it everywhere. And then you're just going to fill your jars. You're going to want to leave about 1/4 inch of headspace. Yes. Do we know the average amount that we usually get out of a pawpaw? 50% weight-wise. So this is 4 pints. So we used 6 cups of pulp. I'd say probably 2 or 3 pawpaws, or probably 4, 5 pawpaws in a cup, maybe. And this will yield you usually 4, 4.5 pint jars, or 7 to 8 half-pint jars. So now we're just going to take these and make sure the rim is clean. Put them on finger tight. And then we're going to hot water bath these for 18 to 20 minutes. And that is also something I have set up out back. And then once they create a seal, you will hear them start popping. So hopefully you'll hear that once you guys get back from your orchard tour, because that is how easy it is to make pawpaw jam and bread, both of which we will tasting after the tour. Are there any final questions for me? Yes. If you were to make a pie, would it be more of a pumpkin pie? like a custard pie typically. Yes.
Does anyone do drinks or like juices or drinks?
Since it's a thicker thing, it'd be kind of like having a banana juice. But what I have found out during my research and experiments is I have tried to add yeast to ferment it, and it just didn't want to do it, so it just separated all the solids out and made a syrup. So that can be added to stuff, and we'll be start looking into that and adding it to stuff.
I've tried to make Pawpaw wine in the past, and one of the problems with it is so thick, and so we've added water to it to actually, because otherwise, the first time I ever did it, I took Pawpaw pulp, basically added yeast, and I was going to strain it at the end, and I trying to pour it out, and there's nothing that comes out of the paper filter. There's just nothing. It's all congealed. So I do think you need to add quite a bit of water to the pulp, and that way at least you're going to be able to then filter out the juice, because otherwise it's very cloudy. That's the other problem.
Yes. These will probably be for a future tasting, maybe this weekend with Sheri, but we have some jams I made last week for you for the tasting. All right, enjoy your orchard tour.
Okay, so next on the agenda is the Pawpaw Orchard Tour, but I do want to mention again, I already mentioned a little bit, so when you come back in from your orchard tour, we're going to have the fruit tasting. So we've got 6 different Pawpaw varieties. Some of them are named, some of them just have numbers. And so the numbered ones are what we call advanced selections, that are some varieties that we're looking at that we might want to name and release as new cultivars from KSU. So we always like to hear feedback from people about how you like it. So that's going to be set up in the hallway on the same tables where you had lunch. There'll be fruit set up. And there will be sheets where you can evaluate, write the variety name or number, then evaluate it on flavor, appearance, and texture on a range from 1 to 5, poor to excellent, to let us know how you liked those fruit and, which varieties you like the best. And that's one thing that factors into us making a decision about new varieties that we want to release. And like I mentioned on the back, there's also evaluating the jam and the ice cream. And like I mentioned, I didn't add the bread, but if you'd like to add that at the bottom, that would be good too. And I think I only made 80 copies. There's a bigger crowd than we expected, which is a good thing. So there may not be enough for everyone, so you could share it, if you're here with family or friends, share, or if you don't end up getting one, then that's okay. Still, partake in the fruit tasting, of course. So next will be the orchard tour with Jeremy. So just follow Jeremy out the front doors and to the parking lot, and to the left to that Pawpaw orchard that's just right next to the parking lot. And you can see some of the trees out there. So thanks.